Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Victoria Redmond, but everyone calls me Vicky. I've been a park ranger for 11 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything the wilderness could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, illegal hunters, drug labs hidden in caves, you name it. But nothing prepared me for what happened in March of 1982, deep in the Jefferson National Forest. I'm not like most rangers. Before I put on this uniform, I was an anthropologist. I studied people. How they lived, what they believed, why they settled where they did. That background is why they assigned me to protect the archaeological sites scattered throughout Wise County. These aren't just old camping spots. They're the remains of settlements built by a people called the Melungeons. The Melungeons were a mystery. Mixed-race families who appeared in these mountains centuries ago, speaking broken English and claiming to be Portuguese. Nobody knew where they really came from. Some folks said they were descendants of shipwrecked sailors. Others whispered darker things, that they weren't quite human, that they could change their shape like animals. But I knew better. Those were just racist stories, the kind of tales people tell when they're afraid of what they don't understand. That Tuesday morning started like any other. The snow was melting, turning the mountain trails into muddy streams. I was driving my Jeep up a logging road toward Newman's Ridge when I got the radio call. "Ranger Redmond, this is dispatch. We've got a vandalism report at the Collins site." The Collins site was one of our most important protected areas. Archaeologists had found the foundation stones of what might have been the original Melungeon settlement. Federal law protected it, which meant hefty fines for anyone who messed with it. On my way, I radioed back, already dreading what I'd find. Usually it was just beer cans and graffiti. Sometimes hunters would dig fire pits in the wrong spots. But when I reached the site, my stomach dropped. This wasn't random vandalism. Someone had dug up 3 graves. The earth was scattered everywhere, old bones gleaming white in the weak sunlight. But something was wrong with the holes. They weren't dug from the top down like you'd expect from grave robbers. The dirt was pushed outward from the bottom, like something had burst up from underneath. I pulled out my camera and started documenting everything, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My hands shook as I took photos of the disturbed ground. In all my training, nobody had ever mentioned graves being opened from the inside. That's when I noticed the tracks. Leading away from the graves were footprints, human footprints, bare feet in the mud. But after about 20 yards, the human prints just stopped. In their place were paw prints. Big ones, like from a wolf, but wolves had been extinct in Virginia for decades. I followed the animal tracks for another 50 feet before they vanished entirely at the edge of a rocky outcrop. Whatever had made them had simply disappeared. My radio crackled. "Ranger Redmond, what's your status?" I looked back at the ruined graves, then at the impossible trail leading away from them. A cold wind blew down from the ridge, carrying a smell I couldn't identify, something wild and old and wrong. "Dispatch," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm going to need backup. And maybe you should call Professor Mullins. We're going to need someone who knows the local history." As I waited for help to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I turned around, I caught glimpses of movement in the trees, pale shapes that vanished the moment I tried to focus on them. The temperature was dropping fast, even though the weather report had called for a warm day. My breath came out in white puffs, and ice began forming on the puddles around the graves. Something was very wrong on Newman's Ridge, and I was about to learn that some old stories weren't stories at all. Professor James Mullins arrived an hour later, his old pickup truck struggling up the muddy logging road. At 73, he was one of the few people who still remembered the old Melungeon families before they scattered or died out. His grandmother had been one of them, which made him our best source for understanding their culture. "Lord have mercy," he whispered when he saw the graves. His weathered face went pale. "This ain't good, Vicky. This ain't good at all." "What do you mean?" I asked, helping him step carefully around the disturbed earth. "My grandmama used to tell stories," he said slowly. "About the old ones, the moon-eyed people," she called them. "Said they were the first Melungeons, before the others came. She said they weren't quite normal. I'd heard about the Moon-Eyed People before. Cherokee legends described them as pale, strange beings who lived in caves and only came out at night. Most scholars thought they were just stories about early European settlers. Professor, with respect, we're dealing with vandals here, not fairy tales. He knelt beside one of the opened graves, studying the way the dirt was scattered. Then how do you explain this? Look at it, Vicky. Something broke out of these graves from below. And these bones. He picked up a fragment and held it to the light. This skull's been underground for at least 200 years. But look at this. He pointed to deep scratch marks on the bone. Fresh scratch marks. Whatever was in here, he said quietly, it woke up. That's when my equipment started acting up. My camera, which had been working fine all morning, began showing strange images on the screen. Instead of the photos I'd taken, it displayed pictures of the forest at night. Pictures I'd never taken. In the background of each image, pale figures stood between the trees, watching. That's impossible, I muttered, checking the camera's memory card. According to the device, the photos had been taken at 3:17 a.m. that morning. But I'd been asleep at the ranger station at 3:17 a.m. My radio started picking up voices, even though it was set to our usual frequency. Whispered conversations in a language I didn't recognize. When I tried to respond, the voices stopped. We need to leave, Professor Mullins said suddenly. Right now. We can't leave a crime scene. Look around you, girl. I did look around, and my blood went cold. The forest had gone completely silent. No bird calls, no insect noise, nothing. Even the wind had stopped. But we weren't alone. Standing at the edge of the clearing were 3 people. A man, a woman, and a child. All dressed in old-fashioned clothes. Their skin was paper white, almost translucent. But it was their eyes that made me take a step backward. Completely black eyes, like looking into deep wells. Can we help you? I called out, trying to sound official and in control. The 3 figures didn't respond. They just stared at us with those terrible black eyes. Then the child smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too white. We're looking for our family, the child said in a voice that sounded like autumn leaves scraping on stone. We've been sleeping for such a long time, but now we're awake and we want to go home. The woman nodded toward the opened graves. Thank you for letting us out. We didn't, I started to say. But Professor Mullins grabbed my arm. Don't talk to them, he whispered urgently. My grandmama said never to talk to the Moon-Eyed People. They can steal your voice, steal your face. As if responding to his words, the man stepped forward. His features began to shift and change like melting wax. His nose became longer, his jawline sharper. His white skin darkened to a healthy tan. Within seconds, he looked exactly like Professor Mullins, except for the black eyes. Don't be afraid, the creature said in Professor Mullins' voice. We just want to come home. I grabbed the professor's hand and pulled him toward my jeep. Run. We crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at our clothes. Behind us, I heard something that might have been laughter. If laughter could sound like breaking glass. When we reached my vehicle, I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. The engine turned over just as something pale and fast streaked past my window. I gunned it, spinning tires in the mud as we raced down the mountain. In my rearview mirror, I saw 3 figures standing in the road behind us. As I watched, they began to change, their human shapes dissolving into something else entirely, something with 4 legs and pale fur. What were those things? I gasped. Professor Mullins was crying, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. The old ones, he whispered. They're back. God help us all, they're back. That night, I tried calling the county sheriff's office to report what we'd seen. But when I described the 3 pale figures, Deputy Compton just laughed. Sounds like you've been reading too many ghost stories. Ranger Redmond. Probably just some folks playing dress-up. We get that sometimes near the old settlements. Tourists love that spooky stuff. But I knew what I'd seen. And when I checked my camera again that night, all the photos from the crime scene were gone. Every single one. In their place were dozens of images taken throughout the day, showing me and Professor Mullins from impossible angles. Pictures taken from above, as if something had been flying overhead, watching us the entire time. Something was hunting in Jefferson National Forest. Something that had been sleeping in those old graves for generations. And now it was awake. Over the next 3 days, everything went to hell. It started with Dr. Robert Hensley, the archaeology professor from Virginia Tech, who'd been documenting Melungeon sites for the state. He was supposed to meet me at the Collins site on Thursday morning to examine the grave disturbances. When he didn't show up, I called his hotel. Dr. Hensley checked out yesterday, the desk clerk told me. Said he had a family emergency. That was strange. Dr. Hensley was dedicated to his work. Obsessed, really. He told me just last week that this project was the most important thing in his life. It wasn't like him to abandon a site in the middle of an investigation. But then he called me that afternoon. "Vicky, sorry about this morning," he said, though his voice sounded odd, flatter than usual. "I had to drive back to Blacksburg. Personal matters. Is everything okay? You sound different. Just tired." "Listen, I've been thinking about those graves. I think you're right. It's probably just vandalism. Kids, maybe. No need to involve the State Archaeological Board." I nearly dropped the phone. 3 days ago, Dr. Hensley had been furious about the grave disturbances, talking about federal investigations and prosecuting whoever was responsible to the full extent of the law. Now he wanted to drop it entirely? "Dr. Hensley, are you sure you're feeling all right?" "Never better. In fact, I feel like a completely different person." The line went dead. That evening, I decided to patrol the Collins site on foot. If vandals were coming back, I wanted to catch them in the act. I parked my Jeep at the bottom of the ridge and hiked up through the darkening forest, flashlight in one hand, radio in the other. The site looked peaceful in the moonlight. Someone had filled in the opened graves and placed wildflowers on the fresh earth. At first, I felt relieved. Maybe the whole thing really was just vandalism, and whoever had done it felt guilty enough to make things right. Then I noticed the caves. Newman's Ridge was honeycombed with limestone caves, most of them unexplored. But tonight, warm yellow light was flickering from inside the largest cave mouth, about 50 yards from the burial ground. I should have called for backup. Should have retreated and returned with the sheriff's department. Instead, I crept closer, drawn by curiosity and the stubborn need to understand what was happening on my mountain. The cave entrance was larger than I'd remembered, big enough for several people to walk through side by side. The light was coming from deep inside, and I could smell something cooking. Meat, but not quite like any meat I'd ever smelled before. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped into the cave. The passage opened up into a vast underground chamber. Dozens of smaller caves branched off in all directions, like the spokes of a wheel. In the center of the main cavern, a fire burned in a ring of stones. Around the fire sat 7 people, all with that same pale skin and black eyes I'd seen at the graves. They were eating. I bit back a scream when I realized what they were eating. The remains were too far away to identify clearly, but I could see hiking boots, a backpack, a North Face jacket that looked very familiar. The Ashworth couple. Tom and Mary Ashworth had been reported missing 3 days ago after failing to return from a day hike. The search teams had been looking for them all week. One of the pale figures looked up and saw me standing in the cave entrance. It was the child from the forest, though something was different about its face now. Its features kept shifting slightly, like I was looking at it through moving water. "Ranger Redmond," it said in a voice that sounded exactly like mine. "We've been waiting for you." I turned to run, but the cave entrance was blocked. A tall man stood there, smiling with my own face. Down to the last detail, my brown hair, my green eyes, even the small scar on my chin from a childhood accident. The only difference was that his eyes were completely black. "Don't be afraid," my doppelganger said. "We just want to talk." More figures emerged from the side passages. I counted at least a dozen, all with different faces but the same pale skin and black eyes. Some looked like people I recognized, hikers who'd gone missing over the years, local residents I hadn't seen in a while. "What are you?" I whispered. The child answered, its voice cycling through different people as it spoke. A man's voice, then a woman's, then an elderly person's, all layered together like a twisted chorus. "We are the first people of these mountains. Your kind calls us Melungeons, but that's not what we are. We are what came before. What your ancestors found when they climbed up from the valleys. We've been sleeping," added another figure, this one wearing the face of a Park Service employee I knew had transferred to another forest last year. "Sleeping and dreaming of home. But the world changed while we slept. Our sacred places were fenced off. Our caves were mapped and marked for tourists. So we decided to wake up, said my doppelganger, and we decided to come home. I backed against the cave wall, feeling the cold stone through my jacket. The missing hikers, the Ashworths. What did you do to them? The child smiled with sharp white teeth. We borrowed their faces, their voices, their memories. It's so much easier to move through your world when we look like you. But we're tired of hiding in caves, said another creature. Tired of hunting in secret. This mountain belongs to us. It always has. My radio crackled to life. Ranger Redmond, this is dispatch. What's your status? The creature wearing my face tilted its head, listening. Then it spoke into the darkness. Dispatch, this is Ranger Redmond. All clear on Newman's Ridge, just completing evening patrol. The voice coming from its mouth was perfect. Exactly my voice, my tone, even my habit of saying all clear at the end of routine reports. Copy that, Ranger Redmond. Have a safe night. I opened my mouth to scream into my radio, to tell dispatch what was really happening. But no sound came out. My voice was gone. The child laughed. We told you we could steal voices. We can steal so much more. That's when I noticed the piles of clothes scattered around the cave. Dozens of outfits from different time periods. Some looked like they were from the 1800s. Others were more recent, including Dr. Hensley's tweed jacket and the Ashworth's hiking gear. These things had been killing people and taking their identities for generations. And now they had their sights set on the modern world. The creature with my face stepped closer. You're going to help us, Ranger Redmond. You're going to give us access to your world, your towns, your cities, and in return, we'll let you keep your life. I shook my head frantically, trying to back away. Oh, you don't have a choice, it said sweetly. Because tomorrow morning, Ranger Victoria Redmond is going to report to work, as usual. She's going to tell everyone that the vandalism case is closed and there's nothing to worry about on Newman's Ridge. The thing wearing my face leaned closer, and I could smell its breath, like old earth and decay. The only question, it whispered, is whether the real Victoria Redmond will still be alive to see it happen. They kept me in a side cave for the rest of the night, bound with ropes that felt too strong to be made by human hands. Every few hours, one of them would come check on me, wearing a different face each time. A Forest Service supervisor from Tennessee, a local sheriff's deputy. Even my own mother, though she'd been dead for 10 years. Stop it. I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. They'd given it back to me, but just enough to speak. We're just practicing, said the thing with my mother's face and those horrible black eyes. We want to get it right when we visit your friends and family. We wouldn't want to disappoint them. By morning, I could hear them moving around in the main cavern, getting ready. They'd chosen 3 forms to start with. My face, Dr. Hensley's, and Deputy Compton from the sheriff's office. A perfect little invasion force to infiltrate law enforcement and park services. But they'd made one mistake. In all their talk about stealing faces and voices, they'd revealed something important. They were bound to this place. This mountain, these caves. That's why they'd stayed hidden for so long. They couldn't leave Newman's Ridge for more than a few days at a time, or they'd start to weaken and fade. They needed the mountain, which meant I might have a chance. Around noon, I heard footsteps coming down the passage. Real footsteps, not the too quiet movement of the creatures. Human voices calling my name. Vicky, Ranger Redmond, are you in there? It was a search team. Someone had noticed I hadn't checked in, and they'd come looking. But how could I tell which ones were real, and which ones were the creatures in disguise? In here, I called, hoping my voice would carry. I'm trapped in the back cave. The footsteps got closer, and I heard familiar voices. Deputy Compton, Ranger Martinez from the Clinch District, Dr. Hensley. But wait, Dr. Hensley was supposed to be back in Blacksburg, and I'd seen the creatures wearing Deputy Compton's face just hours ago. Vicky, thank God, said Dr. Hensley as he appeared at the cave mouth. We've been looking for you all night. Except his eyes weren't quite right. They were brown instead of blue, and they reflected the flashlight beam like an animal's. The ropes are really tight, I said carefully. I think you'll need a knife to cut them. Of course, Dr. Hensley said, pulling out a hunting knife. But he held it wrong, like he'd never used one before. The real Dr. Hensley was left-handed. This thing was using its right hand. Actually, I said, Maybe Deputy Compton should do it. She's had more experience with this kind of thing. The creature wearing Dr. Hensley's face hesitated, looking confused. In that moment of uncertainty, I rolled away from the cave wall and kicked out hard with both legs, catching it in the knees. It went down hard, and its appearance flickered like a TV with bad reception. For just a second, I saw its true form: pale skin, black eyes, and teeth that were far too sharp. "Not human!" I screamed as loud as I could. "They're not human!" The cavern erupted into chaos. I heard gunshots, shouting, the sounds of a fight. But I was still tied up, still helpless in the dark side passage. That's when Professor Mullins appeared. "Easy now," he said, cutting my ropes with a proper knife held in the proper hand. "Let's get you out of here." "How do I know you're real?" I asked, even as he helped me stand. He smiled sadly. "Because I brought this." He held up a small iron cross, the kind the old Melungeon families used to wear. The moment it came near me, I heard screaming from the main cavern. High, inhuman screaming that made my teeth ache. "Iron," he explained. "Grandmama said it was the only thing that could hurt them. They can't touch it, can't abide it." We made our way through the cave system, following the sounds of gunfire and shouting. In the main cavern, I saw a scene from a nightmare. 3 real people, Deputy Compton, Ranger Martinez, and a state trooper I didn't recognize, were backed against the cave wall, firing at a pack of creatures that kept shifting between human and animal forms. Professor Mullins pulled out more iron objects: old railroad spikes, a horseshoe, even some iron nails. "Here," he said, pressing them into my hands. "Touch them with these." The creatures couldn't maintain their human shapes when the iron got close. They shifted and flowed like liquid, revealing their true forms: pale, elongated figures with 2 long limbs and faces that weren't quite right. Ancient things that had been pretending to be human for so long they'd almost forgotten what they really were. "You can't stop us," hissed the one that had been wearing my face. "We've been here for centuries. This mountain is ours." "Maybe," I said, holding up the iron cross Professor Mullins had given me. "But you're not the only ones with a claim." I thought about everything I'd learned, everything Professor Mullins had told me about his grandmother's stories. The Melungeons hadn't just been victims of these creatures. Some of them had been allies, partners. They'd lived in peace for generations, sharing the mountain. "Your ancestors made a deal," I said, hoping I was right. "They agreed to share this place, to protect it together." The creature's black eyes narrowed. "The old agreements are broken. The sacred places have been violated." "Not by me," I said. "I've spent 11 years protecting this mountain, keeping people away from your burial grounds, preserving your history." For a long moment, we stared at each other across the cave. The gunfire had stopped. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. "What do you propose?" the creature asked finally. "A new agreement. You stay in the deep places, the wild places where tourists don't go. I'll expand the protected areas, keep people away from your sacred sites, and you stop killing hikers. And if someone violates the sacred places again?" I thought about the open graves, the federal protection laws, the power I had as a park ranger to close areas to the public. "Then you tell me, and I'll stop them, legally, without anyone having to die." The creature wearing my face tilted its head, considering. Around the cave, the others waited for its decision. "You would do this? Become the guardian between our worlds?" "It's what I've been doing all along," I said. "I just didn't know it." The creature nodded slowly. "Very well. But if you fail, if the sacred places are violated again, the old ways return. And we will take our mountain back." "Understood." One by one, the creatures faded back into the shadows of the cave. But just before the last one disappeared, it turned back to me. "The iron burns," it said, "but respect, respect we remember." The official report listed everything as a case of severe hypothermia and hallucinations brought on by carbon monoxide exposure from inadequate cave ventilation. The missing hikers were found 2 days later, alive but confused, wandering near the Tennessee border with no memory of the past week. Dr. Hensley returned from his family emergency, acting perfectly normal, though he couldn't explain why he'd suddenly decided to leave the dig site. Nobody questioned it too hard. People want simple explanations for strange events, especially when the alternative is admitting that things exist in this world that don't belong in textbooks. I got a promotion 6 months later. supervisor of cultural resource protection for the entire Jefferson National Forest. My first act was to expand the protected area around Newman's Ridge by 3,000 acres, citing unique archaeological significance and sensitive environmental conditions. The cave systems were declared off-limits to the public. Too dangerous, we said. Unstable rock formations and toxic gas pockets. The state backed us up after I submitted a very detailed report about potential liability issues. Professor Mullins became my unofficial consultant on cultural sensitivity issues related to Melungeon sites. We meet once a month to discuss preservation strategies and review any unusual reports from the deep wilderness. He never mentions his grandmother's stories, and I never mention what we saw in that cave. But sometimes, when we're walking the old trails, he'll point to a spot and say, "Best to keep folks away from that area." Just in case. The agreement has held for 3 years now. There have been a few incidents, hikers who claimed to see pale figures in the woods, campers who reported strange voices in the night, but no one's gone missing. No more opened graves. No more impossible tracks in the mud. I still patrol Newman's Ridge twice a week. Officially, I'm checking for signs of illegal camping or poaching. Unofficially, I'm maintaining a peace treaty between two worlds that were never meant to touch. Last Tuesday, I found something new at the Collins site. Not vandalism this time. The opposite. Someone had repaired the old stone foundations, restacking them with precision that would make a master mason jealous. Fresh wildflowers had been placed on every grave marker, arranged in patterns that meant something to someone who remembered the old ways. At the center of the restored site, carved into a flat piece of limestone, was a single word in a language I didn't recognize. But somehow I knew what it meant. Respect. I left my own offering that day. A small iron horseshoe, placed carefully at the base of the largest headstone. Not as a threat, but as a reminder. A symbol of the balance we've built between the world of daylight and forms and the older, darker world that sleeps beneath. When I came back the next week, the horseshoe was gone. In its place was a single white feather, perfectly clean despite lying on the forest floor for 7 days. The agreement continues. The mountain keeps its secrets, and I keep mine. But sometimes, on very quiet nights, when the moon is dark and the forest holds its breath, I hear them moving through the wilderness. Not hunting now, just existing, reclaiming the wild places where they belong, staying away from the places where they don't. And I sleep better knowing that some old promises, even broken ones, can be remade. Even if the world never knows how close it came to something that would have changed everything forever. The creatures of Newman's Ridge are still there, waiting in their caves and hidden valleys. But now they wait with permission, in a place set aside for things that don't quite fit into the modern world. My job is to make sure it stays that way. And God help me, I think I'm getting good at it. My name is Isaiah Blackstone, and I've been a park ranger at Land Between the Lakes for 16 years. In that time, I've seen just about everything: tourists getting lost, kids breaking bones on trails, even a few meth labs hidden deep in the woods. But I've never seen anything I couldn't explain with common sense and a little bit of science. That's why I didn't believe Margaret Bell Howard when she first came to me about the problems at the Bell homestead. It was early September 1987, one of those humid Tennessee evenings where the air feels thick enough to drink. I was finishing up paperwork in my office when Margaret knocked on my door. She looked terrible, dark circles under her eyes, hands shaking as she held her coffee cup. "Isaiah, we need to shut down the homestead demonstrations," she said, without even saying hello first. Margaret had worked as a historical interpreter at the replica Bell family farm for 8 years. She was good at her job, really good. Visitors loved her presentations about frontier life in the 1800s. She even claimed to be a distant relative of the actual Bell family, though I'd never checked if that was true. "What's the problem?" I asked, gesturing for her to sit down. "The attacks," she said quietly. "They're getting worse." I sighed. Here we go again. The Bell Witch legend was famous around these parts. Back in 1817, the Bell family claimed an evil spirit terrorized them for years, throwing things, attacking people, even supposedly killing the family patriarch, John Bell. Tourists ate that stuff up. We'd built the replica homestead partly because of the legend's popularity. But I didn't believe in ghosts. Never had. "Margaret, We've talked about this, I said gently. There's no such thing as noob. I'm not crazy. She slammed her cup down, coffee slopping over the side. Yesterday, during the afternoon demonstration, something invisible grabbed Jenny Morrison's throat, right in front of 20 visitors. She couldn't breathe, Isaiah. We had to call an ambulance. Jenny was another interpreter, young woman just out of college. I'd heard she'd had some kind of panic attack during a presentation, but this was the first I'd heard about any grabbing. The doctor said it was an asthma attack, I said. Jenny doesn't have asthma. And look at this. Margaret pulled down the collar of her dress. Dark bruises circled her neck like fingers. This happened 2 nights ago when I was closing up the cabin. I was alone, Isaiah, completely alone. And something choked me until I passed out. I stared at those bruises. They did look like finger marks. But there had to be a logical explanation. Have you reported this to the police? I asked. And tell them what? A ghost attacked me? She laughed bitterly. They'd think I was insane, just like you do. I don't think you're insane. I think something's going on, and we need to figure out what it really is. I stood up. I'll come out to the homestead tomorrow and take a look around. Maybe we've got a wildlife problem, or someone's been sneaking onto the property. Margaret looked at me like I was the crazy one. It's not an animal, Isaiah. And it's not a person. It's her, Kate Batts, the Bell Witch. She's back. After Margaret left, I sat in my office and tried to make sense of things. I'd grown up in Tennessee, heard the Bell Witch stories my whole life. My grandmother used to swear they were true, said her grandmother had known people who knew the Bell family. But I'd learned long ago that family stories got twisted and exaggerated over time. The Bell Witch was just frontier hysteria, I'd always figured. Maybe food poisoning from bad grain, or some kind of mass delusion brought on by stress and religious fervor. People back then didn't understand mental illness or neurological problems. They blamed everything on spirits and demons. But those bruises on Margaret's neck were real. I decided to spend the next day at the homestead, watching the demonstrations and checking the buildings for any signs of intruders or structural problems. There had to be a rational explanation. I just had to find it. The next morning, I drove out to the demonstration farm area before sunrise. The Bell homestead sat in a small clearing surrounded by dense oak and hickory forest. We'd built it to look exactly like the original, a log cabin with a dog trot design, a separate kitchen building, a barn, and a small garden. Everything was historically accurate, down to the wooden pegs holding the logs together. It should have felt peaceful in the early morning light. Instead, it felt wrong somehow. The birds weren't singing. The air felt too still, too heavy. I told myself I was just being influenced by Margaret's fears. I spent the morning checking every building. The cabin was solid, no signs of break-ins or damage. The kitchen building was fine. The barn looked good, nothing out of place. Around noon, Margaret and the other interpreters arrived to prepare for the afternoon demonstration. Jenny Morrison was with them, though she still looked pale and shaky. "How are you feeling?" I asked her. "Better," she said, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. It was just an asthma attack. The doctor gave me an inhaler. "Jenny doesn't want to talk about what really happened," Margaret said sharply. "None of them do. They're all scared." The afternoon demonstration started at 2 o'clock. About 30 visitors gathered in the cabin while Margaret explained how frontier families lived in the early 1800s. She showed them the fireplace where all the cooking happened, the simple furniture, the rope bed in the corner. Everything was going fine until she started talking about the Bell family specifically. In 1817, John Bell and his family lived on a farm much like this one, just a few miles from here, Margaret said. They were good Christian people, respected in their community. But that year, something evil came into their lives. It started small, strange noises in the walls, objects moving by themselves. John Bell thought it was just rats at first. The temperature in the cabin dropped suddenly. I could see my breath. Several visitors noticed too, looking around confused. It was 90 degrees outside. Then the attacks began. Margaret continued. Her voice had changed slightly, becoming more formal. The entity, Kate Batts, they called her. She could speak. She tormented the family day and night. She pulled the children's hair, slapped their faces, threw furniture across rooms. A ceramic bowl on the table suddenly flew across the room and smashed against the wall. Visitors screamed. Jenny Morrison grabbed Margaret's arm, her face white with fear. "Everyone stay calm," I said loudly, moving toward the front. "Old buildings settle. That bowl probably wasn't secured properly." Another bowl flew off the table, then a wooden spoon. Then an iron pot that must have weighed 10 pounds sailed through the air and crashed into the fireplace. People were running for the door now, pushing and shoving to get out. I didn't blame them. When the cabin finally emptied, only Margaret, Jenny, and I remained. Everything had gone still again. The temperature was normal. "Still think it's rats?" Margaret asked quietly. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I cleared the homestead of visitors and closed it down for the rest of the day. Margaret and the other interpreters went home, but I stayed. I needed to understand what was happening. By 6 o'clock, I was alone at the homestead. The sun was setting, painting the clearing in shades of red and gold. I sat on the cabin's front porch with a notebook, trying to document everything I'd seen. Flying objects, sudden temperature drops. These were classic poltergeist phenomena, according to the paranormal books I'd skimmed in the past. But I didn't believe in poltergeists. There had to be another explanation. Maybe someone had rigged the cabin with hidden wires or mechanisms. Maybe this was an elaborate prank by someone who didn't like the historical demonstrations. I decided to search the cabin again, more thoroughly this time. Inside, the light was fading fast. I turned on my flashlight and started examining the walls, looking for hidden strings or wires. Nothing. The floor was solid, no trap doors or hidden compartments. The furniture was all period-appropriate and handmade, nothing modified or motorized. I was checking the fireplace when I heard it. A woman's voice, singing softly, coming from the kitchen building outside. I froze, listening. The song was old-fashioned, the melody unfamiliar. The words were unclear, but the voice was definitely female. "Margaret," I called out, "is that you?" The singing stopped. I walked out of the cabin and across the dog trot toward the kitchen building. The door was closed. I'd locked it myself earlier. "Hello?" I pushed the door open. The kitchen was empty. But the smell hit me immediately, fresh baked bread and wood smoke, strong and real. My mouth started watering, but there was no fire in the hearth, no bread anywhere. The kitchen was cold and dark. I swept my flashlight around the room. Everything looked normal. Cooking utensils hung on the walls. A butter churn sat in the corner. A work table dominated the center of the space. Then I saw it. On the work table, someone had arranged a collection of small objects: a wooden spoon, a thimble, 3 corn kernels, a piece of string, and a small black stone. They were laid out in a very specific pattern, like a symbol or message. I definitely hadn't seen this arrangement earlier. "Who's here?" I called out. My voice sounded weak, uncertain. The temperature dropped again. My breath fogged in the flashlight beam. And then she spoke. "You don't believe." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing strangely in the small building. It sounded old, the accent strange. "You mock me with your doubt." My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the flashlight. "Who are you? Show yourself." Something moved in the shadows beyond my light. A shape, darker than the surrounding darkness. Tall, female. "I am Kate Batts," the voice said. "And you are trespassing." The door slammed shut behind me. The latch clicked into place. I ran to it, yanked on the handle, locked, from the outside. "Let me out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You tell my story wrong," the voice said. The shadow shape moved closer. "You make entertainment from my suffering. You profit from my rage. I don't understand. John Bell stole my land. He cheated me, called me witch, turned the community against me, and when I cursed him, they said I was evil. They remembered him as the victim." The voice was rising, filling with anger. "But I was the one wronged. I was the one destroyed." The objects on the work table began to vibrate. Then they lifted into the air, spinning slowly. "I'm sorry," I stammered. "I didn't know. I'll fix it. We'll tell the real story." "Liar." The objects flew at me. I threw my arms up, feeling them strike my head, my shoulders, my chest. The black stone hit my forehead hard enough to make me see stars. I stumbled backward, tripped over the butter churn, and fell hard. My flashlight rolled away, its beam cutting crazy angles through the darkness. The shadow shape loomed over me now. I could almost see features: a face twisted with rage, eyes that burned like hot coals. "Tell them the truth," the voice hissed. Tell them Kate Batts was wronged. Tell them she has returned to claim what was stolen. Or I will teach you what suffering truly means. Something grabbed my throat, invisible fingers, impossibly strong, cutting off my air. I clawed at my neck, but there was nothing there to fight, just pressure, crushing pressure. My vision started to go dark. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, and then, suddenly, she released me. I gasped and coughed, sucking in air. When I looked up, the shadow was gone. The door stood open. My flashlight lay on the floor, beam pointing at the work table. The objects were arranged again, but this time they formed clear letters, truth. I got out of that kitchen as fast as I could and didn't stop running until I reached my truck. My hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. A woman stood in front of the cabin, watching me go. She wore a long dress from the early 1800s. Her face was pale as bone. When I blinked, she was gone. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove straight to the public library in Murray, Kentucky, arriving just before it closed. The librarian gave me strange looks. I probably looked wild-eyed and crazy, but she helped me find the historical archives. I spent 3 hours reading everything I could find about Kate Batts and the Bell family. The real story was nothing like the legend we told at the homestead. Kate Batts had been a local landowner, a widow trying to manage her farm alone. John Bell, a respected church elder, had purchased some of her land in 1817, but according to several historical accounts, the sale had been disputed. Kate claimed Bell had cheated her, using his influence in the community to force an unfair price. When she protested, Bell started rumors that she was a witch. In those days, that was a dangerous accusation. Kate was ostracized, threatened, eventually driven from the area. The Bell witch hauntings began shortly after Kate left town. The family claimed an evil spirit was attacking them, throwing objects, speaking in voices, causing illnesses. John Bell died in 1820, supposedly killed by the witch's poison. But I found something else in the archives, a death record. Kate Batts had died in 1821, just a year after John Bell. The cause of death was listed as melancholy and decline. She died alone, penniless, broken by what Bell had done to her. Our historical demonstrations portrayed John Bell as an innocent victim of an evil witch. We never mentioned the land dispute or Kate's accusations. We'd been telling the story from the Bell family's perspective, making Kate Batts into a monster. No wonder she was angry. I finally understood what she'd meant about profit from her suffering. We were literally making money off tourists by portraying her as evil, when the real evil might have been done to her. The library closed at 9. I sat in my truck in the parking lot, trying to decide what to do. I could go to my supervisor, tell him everything. He'd probably think I'd lost my mind. Or I could go back to the homestead and try to make this right. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. A dark bruise was forming on my forehead where the stone had hit me. My neck showed the marks of invisible fingers. Margaret had tried to warn me. I hadn't listened. How many other people might get hurt if I didn't fix this? I started the truck and headed back toward the homestead. It was fully dark now, storm clouds gathering, lightning flickered on the horizon. When I pulled into the clearing, the cabin was dark. But I could see a faint light glowing in the windows. Candlelight, maybe. I grabbed my flashlight and got out of the truck. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Kate, I called out. Kate Batts, I know the truth now. I want to help. The cabin door creaked open by itself. Taking a deep breath, I walked inside. The cabin was lit by candles that hadn't been there before. They sat on the table, the mantel, the window sills, at least 20 of them, flames dancing in a breeze I couldn't feel. In the center of the room stood the shadow woman. She was more solid now, more real. I could see her face clearly, sharp features, hard eyes, a mouth set in a bitter line. She wore a simple dress, faded and worn. Her hair was pulled back severely. "You came back," she said. Her voice still had that strange echo, but it was quieter now, almost sad. "I read about what happened," I said. "About John Bell and the land. You were wronged." "Wronged?" She laughed bitterly. Such a small word for such great harm. "He destroyed me. And then he made himself the victim of his own guilt. I want to change how we tell the story," I said. "We'll include your side. We'll tell visitors about the land dispute, about how the community treated you." Words. She moved closer. I forced myself not to back away. Pretty words won't undo what was done. They won't give me back my land, my reputation, my life. No, I agreed. But it's something. It's acknowledgement, it's truth. She studied me for a long moment. You still fear me? Yes. Good, you should. She raised one hand, and the candles flared brighter. I have grown strong in my rage, Isaiah Blackstone. I have learned to touch this world in ways the living cannot imagine. I can do more than throw objects and squeeze throats. As if to demonstrate, she gestured toward the fireplace. The dead ashes suddenly blazed to life, flames roaring up the chimney. The heat hit my face like a physical blow. I can make them see, she said. I can make them experience what I experienced. Make who see? Those who come here seeking entertainment from my suffering. I can show them exactly what John Bell did to me. Let them feel what I felt. Before I could respond, we both heard it, a car engine, getting closer. I looked out the window. Headlights were coming up the access road. At this hour, it could only be other park staff. Maybe someone had noticed my truck and come to check on me. Kate, please, I said. Don't hurt anyone else. Let me handle this. But she was already fading, becoming shadow again. Watch, she whispered. Watch what I can do. The car pulled into the clearing. I recognized it, a park maintenance truck. Carl Davidson, one of our older workers, got out. He was holding a toolbox. I ran out of the cabin. Carl, what are you doing here? He looked startled to see me. Got a call about a broken door latch in the kitchen building. Figured I'd fix it tonight so it's ready for tomorrow. He squinted at me. You okay? You look rough. Carl, you need to leave. Now. I'm just gonna fix this latch real quick. He walked past me toward the kitchen building. I grabbed his arm, but he shook me off. Isaiah, what's gotten into you? The kitchen door opened before Carl reached it. He paused, then shrugged, and went inside. I ran after him. Carl, please. The door slammed in my face. I heard the latch click. Locked again. Carl! I pounded on the door. Carl, get out of there. Inside, I heard him grunt in surprise. Then he started screaming. I threw my shoulder against the door. It didn't budge. Carl. His screams were horrible, pain and terror mixed together. I could hear him thrashing around, knocking things over. And I could hear her voice, cold and cruel. You think you can fix what is broken? Let me show you what cannot be fixed. The screaming stopped suddenly. I heard a heavy thud, like a body hitting the floor. Then silence. Kate, I yelled. Kate, open this door. He didn't do anything to you. The door swung open so fast I almost fell inside. Carl Davidson lay on the floor, eyes wide and staring. His face was blue, lips purple. His hands clutched at his throat. I dropped to my knees beside him, checking for a pulse. Nothing. His skin was already cold. Oh God, no. I started CPR, knowing it was useless. He was dead. She'd killed him. He could not breathe, Kate's voice said behind me. Just as I could not breathe under the weight of their accusations. Just as I suffocated under their scorn and hatred. I spun around. She stood in the corner, fully visible now, real as any living person. You murdered him. I showed him truth. She tilted her head. Do you still want to help me, Isaiah Blackstone? Or are you beginning to understand that some wrongs cannot be righted with words? I looked down at Carl's body. He had a wife, grandkids. He'd been planning to retire next year. This isn't justice, I said. This is revenge. Is there a difference? She moved closer. John Bell stole from me. I took from him. The people of Adams Station destroyed me. I destroy them in return. Is that not balance? It's murder. And what was done to me? Her voice rose, the candles flickering. When they whispered behind their hands, when they turned away from me in the street, when they let me starve and die alone, what was that? It was wrong, I said. It was all wrong. But killing innocent people won't fix it. Innocent? She laughed. There are no innocent ones. Everyone who profits from that false story, everyone who tells the tale of poor John Bell and the evil witch, they are all complicit. They all deserve to know suffering. Thunder cracked overhead. Rain began hammering on the roof. How many? I asked. How many people are you going to kill? As many as it takes. She smiled. And it was terrible. Until they tear down these buildings. Until they forget the Bell family name. until no one remembers John Bell as anything but what he was: a thief and a liar. She began to fade again, dissolving into shadow. You have until sunrise to decide, Isaiah Blackstone. Help me get my justice, or I will take it myself. Starting with your precious Margaret Bell Howard. A Bell descendant, oh yes, her blood will taste sweet. Then, she was gone. I sat there next to Carl's body, rain pounding outside, and realized I was in way over my head. I needed help, real help. I pulled out my radio. The storm was causing static, but I managed to get through to park headquarters. This is Blackstone. I need police and an ambulance at the Bell homestead. We have a death. Carl Davidson, I paused. And I need you to get me a number for Dr. Charles Robertson at Vanderbilt University. He's a paranormal researcher. Tell him it's an emergency. The dispatcher tried to ask questions, but I cut her off. Just do it, please. I couldn't stay in that kitchen with Carl's body. I went back to the main cabin to wait. The candles were still burning, though Kate was nowhere to be seen. My radio crackled. The dispatcher gave me Robertson's number. I called from the cabin's landline, praying he'd answer at almost midnight. He picked up on the third ring. Hello? Dr. Robertson? My name is Isaiah Blackstone. I'm a park ranger at Land Between the Lakes, and I have a situation involving the Bell Witch property. A man just died, and I think we're dealing with an actual haunting. I need help. There was a pause. The Bell Witch site? I've wanted to investigate there for years, but I could never get permission. You have permission now, I said. How fast can you get here? Dr. Charles Robertson arrived at dawn, driving a van full of equipment. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with thick glasses and nervous energy. Behind him came the police and an ambulance. While the authorities dealt with Carl's body, Robertson set up his equipment around the homestead. EMF detectors, thermal cameras, audio recorders, technology I didn't fully understand. Margaret arrived just after 7, her face pale when she saw the ambulance. What happened? Carl Davidson is dead, I said quietly. The entity killed him. She's real, Margaret. Kate Batts is real, and she's furious. To my surprise, Margaret nodded. I know. She's been appearing to me in dreams, showing me memories. The land dispute, the accusations, everything John Bell did to her. Isaiah, our family was wrong. My ancestor was wrong. Robertson called us over to look at one of his monitors. I'm picking up massive electromagnetic fluctuations. Whatever's here, it's incredibly powerful. I've never seen readings like this. Can you get rid of it? I asked. He looked at me like I was crazy. Get rid of it? This is the most well-documented historical haunting in American history. This is a researcher's dream. It's a nightmare, I said. She's going to keep killing people unless we do something. We need to communicate with her, Robertson said, setting up a device. Establish dialogue, understand what she wants. I know what she wants, I said. Justice, recognition, revenge. As if summoned by her name, the temperature dropped. The equipment started going haywire, alarms beeping and lights flashing. Kate Batts materialized in the center of the cabin, more solid than ever. She looked almost alive now, except for her eyes. They burned with an inner fire that was definitely not human. Robertson stumbled backward, his face going white. Oh my God! She's real. Hello, Margaret Bell Howard, Kate said, ignoring Robertson. Descendant of thieves. You carry his blood. Margaret stood her ground, though I could see her shaking. I know what my family did to you. I'm sorry. We were wrong. Sorry. Kate laughed. Your great-great-grandfather took everything from me, and you say sorry? I can't change the past, Margaret said. But I can help change the future. We'll tell your story. The real story. We'll make sure everyone knows what was done to you. Words, Kate shrieked. Objects began flying around the cabin, dishes, tools, furniture. Robertson dove for cover. I am beyond words. Then what do you want? I yelled over the noise. What will make you stop? She turned to me, and for just a moment, I saw past the rage. Underneath was pain, deep and unhealing, loneliness, grief. I want to be remembered as I was, she said quietly. The flying objects stopped, frozen in midair. Not as a monster, not as the villain in their story. I want someone to speak my name with respect. I want my grave marked. I want... Her voice broke. I want to rest. Margaret stepped forward. Where are you buried, Kate? I don't know. The objects clattered to the floor. I died alone. They buried me in an unmarked grave, in unconsecrated ground. Even in death, they denied me. Robertson was checking his equipment frantically. The readings are off the charts. She's pulling massive amounts of energy from somewhere. A new voice spoke from the doorway. Actually, I think I know where she's buried. We all turned. An elderly woman stood there, leaning on a cane. I recognized her, Mrs. Emery, a local historian in her 80s. I saw the police cars, she said, walking slowly into the cabin. She showed no fear of Kate's presence. Figured it was time to share what my grandmother told me. Who are you? Kate demanded. Sarah Emery. My grandmother was Lucinda Parker. She was your friend, Kate Batts. One of the only ones who stood by you. Kate's form flickered. Lucinda? After you died, Lucinda marked your grave in secret. She couldn't give you a headstone, but she planted a white oak tree. 3 white oaks in a triangle, with your grave at the center. Mrs. Emery pulled out a folded, yellowed paper. She drew a map. My grandmother gave it to me before she died, made me promise to share it when the time was right. She handed the map to Margaret. It's about 2 miles from here, on what used to be your property, Kate. Kate was changing. The rage was draining out of her, replaced by something else. Hope? Relief? Lucinda remembered me? She whispered. She never forgot you, Mrs. Emery said. She knew you weren't a witch. She knew the truth. She just couldn't speak it out loud back then. But she remembered. Kate looked at each of us in turn. When her eyes met mine, they were no longer burning. They looked almost human. If I show you my resting place, she said slowly, will you mark it? Will you tell my true story? Yes, Margaret said immediately. I swear it. I'll make sure, I added. Official park recognition. A memorial. The whole truth. Robertson was nodding frantically. I'll document everything. Academic papers, historical journals. The real story will be known. Kate Batts closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she looked tired. So tired. Then follow me, she said. One last time, follow me. She walked out of the cabin, and we followed her into the morning light. The police and EMTs stared as we passed, but no one tried to stop us. Kate led us into the forest, her form flickering between solid and transparent. We walked for almost an hour, following deer trails and creek beds. Mrs. Emery struggled to keep up, but she refused to turn back. Finally, we came to a small clearing. 3 massive white oak trees stood in a triangle, exactly as Mrs. Emery had described. They must have been over 150 years old. Here, Kate said, I rest here. She stepped into the center of the triangle and looked up at the sky. Dawn light filtered through the leaves, painting everything gold. Thank you, she whispered, for hearing me, for believing. And then she simply faded away, like morning mist in the sun. Robertson's equipment suddenly went quiet. All the alarms stopped. The readings returned to normal. She's gone, he said wonderingly. The electromagnetic signature just disappeared. Margaret was crying softly. Mrs. Emery put a hand on her shoulder. We'll build a proper memorial here, I said, with her real story. No more Bell Witch legend. Just the truth about Kate Batts and what was done to her. And about Lucinda Parker, Mrs. Emery added, the friend who remembered. We stood there in the clearing for a long time, the sun rising higher, the trees whispering overhead. Later, the official report would say that Carl Davidson died of a heart attack. No one would believe the real story anyway. But we knew, and we would make sure others knew too, in time. The truth always finds a way to surface, even if it takes 170 years. The Bell homestead reopened 3 months later, with significant changes to the historical interpretation program. We built a memorial at Kate Batts's gravesite, a simple stone marker with her name, her dates, and the inscription, wronged in life, remembered in truth. Below that, another stone, honored Lucinda Parker, the friend who did not forget. Margaret completely rewrote the historical presentations. Now visitors learned about land disputes in frontier Tennessee, about how accusations of witchcraft were used to silence women who challenged powerful men, about the real Kate Batts and the injustice done to her. The Bell family story was still told, but in context. John Bell wasn't portrayed as an innocent victim anymore. History, I learned, is complicated. Dr. Robertson published his findings in 3 academic journals. The Bell Witch case became a study in how folklore can preserve trauma across generations, how unresolved injustice can echo through time. As for me, I never saw Kate Bats again. But sometimes, walking past the homestead at dusk, I catch the scent of wood smoke and fresh bread. The temperature drops for just a moment, and I hear, very faintly, a woman singing. It doesn't frighten me anymore. I think she's singing because she's at peace. My supervisor wasn't happy about the changes at first. Tourists wanted the spooky Bell Witch legend, not a lecture on historical injustice. But something strange happened. The new interpretation actually drew more visitors. People were fascinated by the real story, the human story beneath the myth. And we haven't had a single incident of paranormal activity since the memorial was dedicated. I still don't know what I believe about ghosts and spirits. What I experienced that week challenged everything I thought I knew about the world. Was Kate Bats's spirit really haunting the homestead? Or was it something else? Collective guilt? Historical trauma made manifest? The land itself remembering? I'm not sure it matters. What matters is that we told the truth. We acknowledged what was done. We gave Kate Bats back her name and her story. Margaret still works at the homestead. She takes groups to the memorial site now, tells them about her ancestors' sins, and about the courage it takes to admit when your family was wrong. Visitors respect that honesty. Mrs. Emery passed away last year at 91. At her funeral, I learned she'd spent decades researching Kate Bats' life, compiling documents and oral histories. All of her research went to the park archives. We're using it to develop educational programs about women's rights in frontier America. Sometimes tourists still ask about the Bell Witch, expecting scary stories. I tell them about a woman named Kate Bats who owned land and fought for what was hers. I tell them about power and injustice, about how easy it is to demonize people who threaten our comfort. I tell them that the scariest things aren't ghosts, they're the harm we do to each other, and the lies we tell to justify it. And then I take them to the memorial in the forest, where 3 oak trees stand guard over a grave that's no longer forgotten. The land remembers, the trees remember, and now, thanks to Kate Bats, we remember too. That's my legacy from the Bell Witch. Not terror, but truth. Not a ghost story, but a lesson about justice delayed, and finally, in some small way, delivered. I've been a ranger for 20 years now. I've seen a lot of things in these woods, but nothing has changed me like that September week in 1987, when I learned that sometimes the dead can't rest until the living tell their truth. Kate Bats can rest now. Her story is known, her grave is marked, her friend's loyalty is honored. And on quiet evenings, when the wind moves through those 3 oak trees, I like to think she's finally singing in peace. My name is Gabriel Thornfield, but everyone calls me Gabe. I've been a ranger at the Ohio River Islands National Wildlife Refuge for 14 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these woods had to offer. I was wrong. It was November 1966, and the weather had turned cold and gray like it does every year before winter really sets in. The leaves were mostly gone from the trees, and you could feel that sharp bite in the air that tells you snow's coming soon. I was driving my patrol truck through the TNT area. That's what we call the old World War II munitions site, about 8 miles outside Point Pleasant. Most folks avoid the place. Can't say I blame them. The TNT area is full of old concrete bunkers where they used to make explosives for the war. After they shut it down, the government just left everything there. Bunkers, contaminated ponds, rusted fences. The whole place feels wrong, like the earth itself remembers what happened there. But it's part of my territory, and the migratory birds don't care about old history. They still use the ponds as rest stops on their way south. That morning, I was checking on the waterfowl counts when my radio crackled to life. "Gabe, you there?" It was Sheriff George Johnson from Point Pleasant. "I'm here, George. What's up?" "Got some folks reporting strange bird sightings out your way. They're saying it's bigger than anything they've ever seen. You notice anything unusual?" I pulled over next to one of the concrete bunkers and looked around. The place was quiet. Too quiet. Usually, you'd hear ducks or geese calling from the ponds, but there was nothing. Just the wind whistling through the empty bunker doorways. "Haven't seen anything yet," I told George. "But I'll keep my eyes open. These folks seem pretty shaken up." Linda Scarberry and her husband were driving through there last night. She says this thing was as big as a small plane, with red eyes that glowed like car headlights. I almost laughed, but something in George's voice stopped me. He'd been sheriff for 20 years. He didn't spook easy. Probably just a crane, I said. Sandhill cranes are pretty big birds. In the dark, with headlights reflecting off their eyes, could look pretty scary. Maybe, George said, but he didn't sound convinced. Just thought you should know. After I signed off, I sat there for a minute, looking out at the empty landscape. As a trained ornithologist, I knew every bird species in West Virginia. The biggest we had were turkey vultures with maybe a 6-foot wingspan. Sandhill cranes were rare around here, but they could reach 7 feet across, nothing bigger than that. I got out of the truck and walked toward the nearest pond. The ground was soft from recent rain, and that's when I saw them, tracks in the mud that made my blood run cold. They weren't bird tracks exactly. They were shaped more like a man's footprints, but huge, maybe 10 inches long. And they were deep, like whatever made them was incredibly heavy. But here's what really bothered me. Between some of the footprints, there were marks in the mud that looked like something had dragged across the ground, something with a span of more than 10 feet. I knelt down and took pictures with my camera, then measured the marks with my field ruler. The wingspan impressions were 12 feet across, edge to edge. That was impossible. No bird in North America was that big. I followed the trail around the pond. Every 20 feet or so, there were more of those massive prints, and always with the wing drag marks between them. It was like something enormous had been hopping along the shore, using its wings to balance or slow itself down. The trail led to one of the old bunkers. The concrete structure was about 30 feet long and 15 feet wide, with a dark entrance that disappeared into shadows. I'd been in these bunkers dozens of times over the years. They were just empty concrete rooms now, maybe some old rusted equipment left behind. But as I approached this one, I noticed something strange. Dead birds were scattered around the entrance, not just one or two, but dozens of them. Ducks, geese, even a few crows. They were arranged in a perfect circle around the bunker opening, like someone had placed them there on purpose. I pulled out my flashlight and examined the birds. They weren't torn apart or eaten, they just looked empty, like something had drained the life right out of them. Their eyes were open but dull, and their feathers had a strange gray tint to them. My hands were shaking a little as I picked up my electromagnetic field detector, part of my standard equipment for checking power line interference with bird migration patterns. The needle went crazy as soon as I turned it on, jumping all the way to the right side of the dial. There was some kind of massive electromagnetic disturbance coming from inside that bunker. I should have left right then, should have called it in and waited for backup. Instead, I clicked on my flashlight and stepped through the bunker entrance. The inside was just like all the others. Bare concrete walls, empty space, a musty smell of old decay. But the electromagnetic readings were off the charts, and there was something else. A low humming sound, so deep I felt it more than heard it. It seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. That's when I saw the scratches. 4 parallel gouges in the concrete wall, each one about 6 inches long and deep enough to leave white scars in the gray surface. Something with claws had been in here. Something strong enough to tear through solid concrete, like it was soft wood. I backed out of that bunker as fast as I could without actually running. But as I reached my truck, I felt like someone was watching me. I turned around and looked back at the bunkers, scanning the roof lines and the surrounding tree line. Nothing. But just for a second, I could have sworn I saw 2 red dots glowing in the shadows of a bunker doorway about 50 yards away. When I blinked and looked again, they were gone. I drove back to the ranger station with my mind racing. 14 years in these woods, and I'd never seen anything that couldn't be explained. Bears, wildcats, even the occasional escaped farm animal. But this was different. This felt like something that didn't belong in our world at all. 3 days passed before I went back to the TNT area. I spent those days checking my books, calling other wildlife refuges, even contacting the university to see if anyone had reported unusual bird sightings. Nothing. But the reports from local residents kept coming in. George Johnson called me twice more. Each time, he had new witnesses describing the same impossible thing. A creature the size of a small aircraft with glowing red eyes and wings that made no sound when it flew. They all said it moved unlike anything they'd ever seen, hovering in place or making sharp turns that would tear apart any normal bird. I was starting to think the whole town was losing its mind. On Thursday morning, I drove back out to check on the bird counts. The weather had turned worse, thick clouds and a cold wind that cut right through my jacket. As I approached the TNT area, I noticed something that made me pull over immediately. Every power line along the road was dead. Not just the lights. I mean, the lines themselves weren't humming with electricity anymore. I could always hear that low electrical buzz when I drove this route, but now there was nothing. I called the power company from my truck radio. "Yeah, we got reports of outages all around the TNT area," the dispatcher told me. "Started about midnight. Can't figure out what's causing it. Lines aren't broken, transformers look fine. It's like something's just sucking the power right out of them." When I reached the pond where I'd found the tracks, I saw that the dead birds were gone. All of them, not scattered by scavengers, just completely gone, like someone had collected them during the night. But there were new tracks in the mud, and these were different. Instead of the hopping pattern I'd seen before, these tracks showed something had been walking upright. The footprints were still huge and deep, but now they were in a steady line like a person walking. And between each print, there were no wing drag marks. Whatever made these tracks had been walking on two legs, with its wings folded. I followed the new trail, and it led me away from the ponds toward the deeper part of the TNT area, where the bunkers were clustered together. The electromagnetic readings on my detector were going crazy again, but this time they seemed to be coming from multiple directions. That's when I heard it, a sound like nothing I'd ever experienced. It started low, almost below the range of human hearing, then rose into a shriek that made my teeth ache. It only lasted a few seconds, but it was loud enough to echo off the concrete bunkers and seemed to come from everywhere at once. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back in the truck and leave. But I was a ranger. This was my territory, and I had a job to do. I pulled out my service pistol. Not that I thought bullets would help against whatever was making that sound, but it made me feel a little better. I crept toward the cluster of bunkers, using the concrete walls for cover. My electromagnetic detector was clicking so fast now, it sounded like a Geiger counter in a radioactive zone. The air itself felt thick and charged, like right before a major thunderstorm. I peered around the corner of one bunker and saw something that made my blood freeze in my veins. There was a man standing about 30 yards away between two of the concrete structures. At least, I thought it was a man at first. He was tall, maybe 7 feet, and standing perfectly still with his back to me. He was wearing what looked like a dark coat that hung down to his ankles. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is a restricted area. You need to leave." The figure didn't move or acknowledge me in any way. He just stood there like a statue. Something about his stillness felt wrong, like he wasn't breathing or shifting his weight the way living things do. I moved closer, keeping my gun drawn, but pointed at the ground. "Sir, I'm a federal ranger. I need you to turn around and show me your hands." That's when the figure slowly began to turn toward me, and I realized it wasn't a man at all. The thing that faced me was roughly human-shaped, but wrong in every detail. Its skin was gray and seemed to shimmer like oil in water. Its arms were too long, hanging almost to its knees. But worst of all were its eyes, 2 burning red circles that glowed with their own light like heated coals in a forge. And behind it, rising up from its shoulders, were wings. They weren't feathered like a bird's wings. They looked more like a bat's wings, but enormous, easily 12 feet from tip to tip. The wing membranes were dark and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. As I watched, frozen in terror, the wings slowly spread out to their full span. The creature took a step toward me, and I could see its feet were more like talons, long, curved claws that left those deep gouges in the ground I'd been finding. When it moved, there was no sound except for a low humming that seemed to come from inside its chest. I tried to raise my gun, but my arms wouldn't obey me. It was like my whole nervous system had shut down. I could only stand there and stare as the thing moved closer. Then it opened its mouth. No sound came out, but suddenly my head was filled with images that weren't my own. I saw the silver bridge that connected Point Pleasant to Ohio, except in these visions, the bridge was falling apart, cars tumbling into the dark water below. I saw people screaming, trapped in their vehicles, as the steel structure collapsed around them. I saw the date, December 15. The images were so vivid and terrifying that I fell to my knees, clutching my head and trying to make them stop. When they finally ended, I was alone. The creature was gone. vanished as completely as if it had never been there. But the electromagnetic readings were still off the charts, and burned into the concrete where it had been standing were 4 claw marks, each one 2 feet long and glowing with residual heat. I ran back to my truck and drove straight to Point Pleasant without stopping. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely steer, and those images of the falling bridge kept flashing through my mind like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. When I burst into Sheriff Johnson's office, he took one look at my face and poured me a cup of coffee without asking any questions. "You saw it, didn't you?" he said quietly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Linda Scarberry's been having nightmares since her sighting. Keeps seeing disasters that haven't happened yet. Her doctor thinks it's stress, but..." He paused. "But I'm starting to think there's something out there that doesn't want to be explained." I told him everything. The tracks, the dead birds, the creature with the glowing eyes. I told him about the visions of the bridge collapse. George listened without interrupting, his face getting more serious with each detail. "December 15, he said when I finished. "That's less than a month away." "It was just a hallucination," I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. "Some kind of electromagnetic effect on my brain. There has to be a scientific explanation." But even as I said it, I knew I didn't believe it. What I'd seen out there wasn't natural. It was something else entirely, and it was trying to tell us something important. The question was, were we smart enough to listen? Over the next 2 weeks, the sightings multiplied. It seemed like every night brought new reports of the creature with the glowing red eyes. People called it different things: the bird, the monster, the thing with wings. But George Johnson started calling it the Mothman, and somehow that name stuck. I tried to stay away from the TNT area, but it was my job to monitor the wildlife refuge. And besides, something was drawing me back. Not curiosity exactly, more like a feeling that the creature wanted me to return, like it had more to show me. The electromagnetic disturbances were getting worse too. Power outages hit Point Pleasant almost every night. Electronics would malfunction for no reason. Car radios would fill with static whenever drivers got near the TNT area. The power company sent out crew after crew, but they couldn't find anything wrong with their equipment. Then people started dying. The first was James Yoder, an electrician working on one of the power substations outside town. They found him dead next to a transformer that showed no signs of malfunction. The medical examiner said his heart had stopped, but there were no obvious injuries. The only strange thing was that every piece of metal on his body, his tools, his belt buckle, even the fillings in his teeth, had become magnetized. The second death happened 3 days later. Rick Daniels was a local pilot who flew a small Cessna out of the Point Pleasant airport. He was coming in for a landing just after sunset when witnesses said they saw something huge fly alongside his plane for several seconds. Then all the electrical systems in his aircraft failed at once. Engine, lights, radio, everything went dead. The plane dropped like a stone into the Ohio River. They pulled Rick's body out the next morning. Like Yoder, he showed no obvious injuries. But every electrical component in his plane had been completely fried, as if hit by lightning during a clear sky. I knew these deaths were connected to the creature I'd seen. I could feel it in my bones. But when I tried to explain my theory to the state police investigators, they looked at me like I was losing my mind. Giant bird creatures don't kill people by draining electricity. That kind of thing only happens in horror movies. But I knew what I'd seen. On November 25th, I made my third trip back to the TNT area. This time I was prepared. I brought a camera with fresh film, a tape recorder, and a military-grade electromagnetic field detector I'd borrowed from a friend at the Army Corps of Engineers. If the Mothman was real, I was going to get proof. The weather was bitter cold with snow flurries, and the sky was so overcast it felt like twilight even though it was only 3 in the afternoon. As I drove through the gates of the TNT area, my borrowed equipment immediately started registering massive electromagnetic disturbances. I parked near the same pond where I'd first found the tracks and got out to look around. The place felt different now, not just empty, but actively hostile, like the very air was watching me. I'd been there maybe 10 minutes when I heard the sound again, that rising shriek that seemed to come from everywhere at once. This time, I was ready for it. I turned on my tape recorder and started taking pictures in the direction of the sound. The Mothman materialized out of the shadows between 2 bunkers like it had been waiting for me. It didn't walk or fly into view. It was just suddenly there, as if it had stepped through an invisible doorway in the air. Up close, in daylight, it was even more terrifying than before. Its skin wasn't just gray, it seemed to shift and move like liquid mercury. Those glowing red eyes were huge, maybe 8 inches across, and they fixed on me with an intelligence that was definitely not animal. When it spread its wings, the span blocked out half the sky. I raised my camera and started shooting pictures as fast as I could advance the film. Through the viewfinder, I could see the creature more clearly. Its face was almost human, except for the eyes and the complete lack of any mouth or nose. It had no visible ears, but somehow I knew it could hear every sound I made. Then it started walking toward me. Each step was completely silent, but I could feel the ground vibrate under its weight. As it got closer, my electromagnetic detector went crazy, clicking so fast it sounded like machine gun fire. The air around the creature shimmered with heat waves, and I realized it was generating some kind of massive energy field. When it was about 15 feet away, it stopped and stared at me. For several seconds, we just looked at each other. Then it tilted its head slightly, like it was curious about something. That's when the visions started again. This time, they weren't just images of the Silver Bridge collapse. I saw the creature itself, flying over Point Pleasant on December 15th. I saw it hovering above the bridge as cars crossed back and forth, oblivious to the danger. I saw it try to warn people by appearing in their headlights, but they just drove faster, thinking it was an hallucination. And then I saw the moment of collapse itself. Not the bridge falling, but the instant before, when the creature opened its wings wide and released a burst of electromagnetic energy so powerful it lit up the night sky like a second sun. It was trying to disable every car on the bridge, to stop them from crossing, to save their lives. But it was too late. The bridge was already breaking apart, and 46 people were about to die. The vision ended, and I found myself on my knees in the mud again, tears streaming down my face. The Mothman was still standing in front of me, but now its posture seemed different. Not threatening, sad. Like it was carrying a burden too heavy for any creature to bear. I struggled to my feet and tried to speak, but my throat was too tight. Finally, I managed to croak out. "You're trying to warn us, aren't you, about the bridge?" The creature's head moved slightly, not quite a nod, but close enough. "Why?" I asked. "Why do you care what happens to us?" This time, the answer came not as visions, but as a feeling that flooded through my mind. Loneliness. Endless, cosmic loneliness. The creature wasn't from our world, but somehow it had become trapped here, bound to this place by forces I couldn't understand. It could see disasters before they happened, but it couldn't prevent them. All it could do was try to warn people, and watch them die when the warnings weren't believed. It had been trying to save lives for decades, maybe centuries. Always alone, never understood, never thanked, just feared and hunted and dismissed as a monster. "I believe you," I whispered. "But I don't know if anyone else will." The Mothman looked at me for a long moment, then slowly folded its wings. Without any warning, it launched itself into the air, rising straight up like a rocket. In seconds, it was just a dark speck against the gray clouds, and then it was gone. I stood there in the falling snow, holding my camera and tape recorder, knowing that I had evidence of something the world wasn't ready to accept. But I also knew I had to try, because in 18 days, 46 people were going to die, and I was the only one who knew it was coming. The next 2 weeks were the worst of my life. I tried everything I could think of to convince someone, anyone, that the Silver Bridge was in danger. I brought my photographs to the sheriff, but they came out blurred and overexposed, showing nothing but dark shapes that could have been anything. The tape recording was just static and electromagnetic interference. I called the bridge authority and tried to explain that I'd received credible information about a structural problem, but I couldn't tell them my source was a winged creature from another dimension. They said they'd look into it, but I could tell from their tone that they thought I was just another small-town crank. I even drove to the bridge myself and spent hours examining it from below, looking for cracks or signs of metal fatigue. But I wasn't an engineer. To my untrained eye, the massive steel structure looked as solid as the day it was built. Meanwhile, the Mothman sightings continued almost every night. The creature seemed to be getting more desperate, appearing to more and more people around Point Pleasant. But instead of listening to what it might be trying to say, everyone just got more scared. Some folks stopped driving through the area after dark. Others started carrying guns, talking about hunting down the monster. On December 10th, 5 days before the date from my vision, I made one last trip out to the TNT area. I wasn't sure what I hoped to accomplish, but I felt like I had to try something. I found the Mothman waiting for me at the same pond where this all started. It was standing in the exact spot where I'd first seen the giant footprints, and for the first time, it looked tired. Its red eyes still glowed, but the light seemed dimmer somehow. Its massive wings were folded tight against its body, like it was trying to make itself smaller. I tried to warn them, I said as I got out of my truck. Nobody believes me. The creature turned its head toward me, and I felt a wave of sadness so deep it nearly knocked me over. In my mind, I saw flashes of other disasters it had tried to prevent over the years. Mine collapses in the 1,940 seconds. Factory explosions in the 1,950 seconds. Car accidents, building fires, industrial accidents. Dozens of tragedies where the Mothman had appeared beforehand, trying to warn people, only to be dismissed as a hallucination or a hoax. "Why don't you just stop the bridge from collapsing yourself?" I asked. "You've got all that electromagnetic power. Can't you use it somehow?" The answer came as another flood of images and emotions. The creature could generate massive electromagnetic pulses, but they were crude tools. It could knock out power grids or disable vehicles, but it couldn't perform delicate work like repairing metal fatigue or strengthening structural supports. It was like trying to perform surgery with a sledgehammer. And there was something else, a cosmic rule or law that I couldn't quite grasp. The Mothman could see disasters coming, and it could try to warn people, but it couldn't directly interfere with the natural flow of events. If it tried to physically prevent the bridge collapse, something even worse might happen as a result. "So, what do we do?" I asked. The creature spread its wings partway and looked toward Point Pleasant. Then it did something I'd never seen before. It walked over to my truck and placed one clawed hand on the hood. The metal grew warm under its touch, and I heard the engine start even though I hadn't turned the key. The message was clear: follow me. For the next hour, the Mothman led me on a flight pattern over the entire Point Pleasant area. It moved through the air like nothing I'd ever seen. No flapping, no visible effort, just smooth, impossible flight that defied every law of physics I knew. I followed in my truck, taking back roads and shortcuts to keep up as best I could. It showed me the route between the bridge and the main population centers. It showed me the exact time, 5:04 p.m., when traffic would be heaviest on December 15th. It showed me where emergency vehicles would need to be positioned for the fastest response time. By the time we returned to the TNT area, I finally understood what the Mothman wanted from me. It couldn't prevent the disaster, and it couldn't make people believe its warnings, but it could give me the information I needed to minimize the casualties. I spent December 11th through 14th preparing. I called in anonymous tips to the Point Pleasant Fire Department and the state police, giving them exact timing information about when and where they should position their emergency response teams on the 15th. I made up stories about credible threats and suspicious activities, anything to get them to take the tips seriously. I also did something that probably saved my own life. I made sure I was nowhere near the Silver Bridge on the evening of December 15th. At 4:30 p.m. on that cold Thursday, I was parked on a hill about 2 miles from the bridge with a pair of binoculars and my police radio. The evening rush hour traffic was building up, just like the Mothman had shown me. Cars and trucks were streaming across the bridge in both directions, carrying Christmas shoppers and commuters home from work. At exactly 5 p.m., I saw it. The Mothman appeared above the bridge, hovering motionless about 50 feet over the roadway. Even from 2 miles away, I could see the glow of its red eyes and the enormous span of its outstretched wings. It stayed there for almost 4 minutes, clearly visible to anyone who bothered to look up. A few cars slowed down or pulled over, their drivers pointing up at the sky. But most people just kept driving, either not seeing the creature or dismissing it as some kind of publicity stunt. At 5:04 p.m., the Mothman suddenly folded its wings and dropped toward the bridge. For one terrifying moment, I thought it was going to land directly on the roadway. Instead, it pulled up at the last second and released the biggest electromagnetic pulse I'd ever seen. The burst of energy was visible as a blue-white flash that lit up the entire river valley. Every car on the bridge immediately lost power. Engines died, lights went out, radios went silent. For about 30 seconds, the bridge was full of motionless vehicles with drivers frantically trying to restart their engines. Then the center span of the silver bridge folded in half like a piece of paper. The sound reached me a few seconds later, a groaning, tearing noise of metal ripping apart, followed by the splash of cars hitting the water. Through my binoculars, I watched in horror as 37 vehicles tumbled into the Ohio River. But it could have been so much worse. If the Mothman hadn't disabled all those cars, if traffic had been moving at full speed when the bridge collapsed, the death toll would have been in the hundreds. Instead, most of the vehicles that went into the water had time to slow down or stop before the collapse. Drivers and passengers had a few crucial seconds to brace themselves or even get out of their cars. The emergency response teams I'd called in were already in position, just like I'd suggested in my anonymous tips. Rescue boats were on the scene within minutes, instead of the hours it would normally have taken. 46 people still died that night, just like the Mothman had shown me. But because of its intervention, over 200 others survived who might not have. As the rescue operations began, I looked up at the sky above the collapsed bridge. The Mothman was gone, vanished as completely as if it had never existed. But somehow, I knew it had served its purpose. The cosmic burden it carried had been lightened just a little bit. I drove home that night knowing that I'd been part of something larger than myself, a desperate attempt by a lonely creature to save as many human lives as possible. It wasn't enough to prevent the tragedy entirely, but it was something. Sometimes, when you're dealing with forces beyond human understanding, something is all you can hope for. I submitted my report about the bridge collapse 3 days later, but I left out any mention of the Mothman. Who would have believed it? Instead, I focused on the electromagnetic anomalies I'd been detecting in the area for weeks, suggesting they might have interfered with the bridge's structural monitoring systems. The official investigation concluded that the collapse was caused by a fatigue crack in an eye-bar in the north suspension chain. The crack had been growing for years, invisible to routine inspections, until the bridge finally couldn't carry the load anymore. Metal fatigue, they called it. A tragic but explainable accident. They never found a connection between the electromagnetic disturbances and the structural failure. As far as the official record was concerned, the two events were completely unrelated. The Mothman sightings stopped after December 15th. For a few weeks, people kept reporting red lights in the sky or strange shadows near the TNT area, but gradually the reports tapered off and then ceased entirely. Whatever the creature was, wherever it had come from, it seemed to be gone. I requested a transfer in February 1967. After what I'd been through, I couldn't stay in Point Pleasant. Every time I looked at the empty space where the Silver Bridge used to be, I remembered those terrible visions of cars tumbling into the dark water. I also remembered the sadness in the Mothman's glowing eyes and the weight of cosmic responsibility it carried. The Park Service moved me to a wildlife refuge in Oregon, as far from West Virginia as I could get while staying in the same job. But even there, 3,000 miles away, I found myself watching the sky at twilight and scanning the tree lines for signs of something that shouldn't exist. Over the years, I've heard stories from other rangers and wildlife biologists about strange encounters in remote areas. Giant birds that fly without flapping their wings, creatures with glowing eyes that appear before natural disasters, electromagnetic anomalies that can't be explained by conventional science. I never tell them about Point Pleasant or the Mothman. Who would believe such a story? But I listen carefully to every report, and I've started to wonder if there might be more than one of these creatures. Maybe they're stationed all over the world, trying to warn us about disasters we can't prevent and tragedies we refuse to see coming. I retired from the Park Service in 1992, but I couldn't bring myself to stop thinking about what I'd witnessed. I started a small consulting company that specializes in disaster preparedness and emergency response planning. Most of my clients think I'm just really good at predicting worst-case scenarios. They don't know that sometimes, late at night, I still get flashes of vision that feel like they're coming from somewhere else. Images of earthquakes, floods, storms, accidents. I can't tell if they're real prophetic glimpses or just the result of an old man's overactive imagination. But I pass along what I see as expert analysis and statistical projections, and sometimes, just sometimes, it helps save lives. I'm 73 years old now, and I've spent 38 years thinking about what happened in Point Pleasant. I've come to believe that the Mothman wasn't a monster at all. It was something closer to an angel, a being from somewhere else that had taken on the impossible job of trying to protect humanity from itself. It failed more often than it succeeded. Most of its warnings went unheeded, and most of the disasters it foresaw came to pass exactly as predicted. But every once in a while, it managed to minimize the damage or save a few extra lives. And maybe, in the cosmic balance of things, that was enough. Last week, my doctor told me I probably don't have much time left. My heart's wearing out, and there's not much they can do about it at my age. So I've decided to write down the whole story, exactly as it happened, in case someone else needs to know. Because I have a feeling the Mothman will be back someday. Maybe not in Point Pleasant, and maybe not in my lifetime. But somewhere, when people are in danger and don't know it yet, I think it will appear again with its glowing red eyes and its impossible wings, trying once more to save us from ourselves. And when that happens, I hope whoever sees it will be smart enough to listen. My name is Gabriel Thornfield, and this is what I saw in the woods of West Virginia in the winter of 1966. I'm not asking you to believe it. I'm just asking you to remember it, in case you ever find yourself face to face with something that shouldn't exist but does anyway. Because if that day comes, you'll need to decide whether to run away in fear or stay and listen to what it's trying to tell you. The choice, as always, will be yours. My name is Marcus Whitethorn, and I've been a ranger at Land Between the Lakes for 12 years. Before that, I studied wildlife biology at the University of Kentucky. I thought I knew everything about the animals in these woods. I was wrong. It was August 1975, and the drought had been going on for 3 months. The lakes were 20 feet below normal. You could walk across mud flats that used to be underwater. The deer were coming out of the deep woods looking for water, and that's when the hunters started calling. "Marcus, you need to get out here," Jim Crawford said on the phone. Jim was 63, been hunting these woods since he was a boy. He didn't scare easy. Something killed 3 of my deer. Didn't eat them, just broke them. I drove out to Jim's property near Hillman Ferry. He met me at his truck, holding a coffee cup with shaking hands. "I've seen bear kills, I've seen cougar kills. This ain't neither," he said. The first deer was lying in a clearing. Its neck was bent at an angle that didn't make sense. I knelt down, put on my gloves, examined it. The bone hadn't been chewed through or torn. It had been snapped clean, like someone had just twisted the head until the spine broke. "What kind of strength does that take?" Jim asked. I didn't answer. I was looking at the ground. The tracks were massive, 18 inches long, almost as wide as my clipboard. They looked like a barefoot human print, but no human foot was that big. The toes were thick and spread apart. The depth of the print meant whatever made it was heavy. Really heavy. "Bear walking on its back legs?" Jim suggested. "Bears don't walk that far upright," I said, "and look at the stride. 6 feet between prints. A bear couldn't do that." I made plaster casts of 3 prints, took photographs with my Nikon, measured everything twice. My hands were steady, my notes were clear, but something in my stomach felt wrong. I'd been in these woods for 12 years. I'd tracked black bears, bobcats, even the occasional lost hiker. I knew the sounds, the smells, the feel of the place. Right then, the forest felt like it was watching me. "You gonna tell me what you think it is?" Jim asked. "I think it's someone pulling a prank," I said. "Big fake feet, scaring the deer, breaking their necks to make it look supernatural." But I didn't believe that. You can't fake a track that deep. You can't fake the weight distribution I was seeing in the soil. That night, I went to the ranger station and pulled out the incident reports from the past 2 months. 7 calls about a wild man in the woods. 4 reports of something walking upright through the trees at night. 2 hunters who swore they'd seen something 9 feet tall. I dismissed them all. Misidentified bears, tall tales, bourbon and imagination. Now I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I hiked into the deep woods near Rushing Creek. That's where most of the sightings had been. The area used to be farmland before the government bought everyone out in the 1960 seconds to make the park. They'd moved whole communities, families who'd lived there for generations. Some of them didn't want to go. I found the old cemetery around noon. Most people didn't know it was there. The government was supposed to relocate all the graves, but they'd missed some. 15 headstones, most of them from the 1800s. Names like Rushing, Whitlow, and Garrett. Some stones had fallen over. Weeds grew everywhere, and there were the tracks again. They circled the cemetery, over and over, like something had been pacing around it, protecting it. I sat down on a fallen log and looked at those tracks. My heart was beating too fast. I'm a scientist. I don't believe in monsters. But 12 years in these woods had taught me one thing. There are animals we haven't classified yet. There are behaviors we don't understand. Nature is bigger and stranger than any textbook. Maybe Bigfoot wasn't a myth. Maybe it was just an unknown primate, smart enough to avoid people, rare enough that nobody could prove it existed. And maybe one of them was living right here, in my forest. I started going to the cemetery every day. I brought my equipment, audio recorders, trail cameras, measurement tools. I was doing real research now, not just checking reports. If there was something out there, I was going to document it properly. The first weird thing I noticed was the sound, or the lack of it. Forests are noisy, birds, insects, squirrels, wind in the leaves. But when I got within 100 yards of that cemetery, everything went quiet. Not gradually, just suddenly silent, like someone had turned off a switch. My head would start to hurt, a pressure in my chest, like I was underwater. I felt anxious for no reason, like I needed to run. The first few times, I actually turned around and left without meaning to. Then I read about infrasound, frequencies below what humans can hear, but we can feel them. They cause dread, unease, physical discomfort. Elephants use it, whales use it. Maybe whatever was out here used it too. On the fourth day, I met Mary Rushing. She was 78 years old, thin as a rail, with gray hair tied back in a bun. She was standing at the cemetery gate when I arrived, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. "You the ranger everyone's talking about?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am, Marcus Whitethorn. I'm Mary Rushing. My great-great-grandparents are buried here, Samuel and Martha Rushing." She pointed to 2 stones under an oak tree. "Government told us we had to leave in '63, said they were moving all the graves. But they didn't move these. They just forgot about them." "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't be sorry, just leave it alone." She looked at me hard. "There's something out here protecting this place. Has been for years. Long as you don't disturb the graves, it won't hurt you. Mrs. Rushing, have you seen it?" She set down the flowers and straightened up. "Once, in '64, right after we moved. I came back to visit, brought my grandson. We were cleaning the stones when I felt it watching, looked up, and there it was, standing in the trees, tall as a house, covered in dark hair. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just watched us. My grandson wanted to run, but I told him to be still. We stood there for maybe 5 minutes, and then it just walked away. Didn't make a sound when it moved, neither. Something that big should crash through the forest, but it was quiet as smoke. What do you think it is?" "I think it's a guardian," she said simply. "When they forced us out, when they scattered our families, something stayed behind to protect what we couldn't take with us. The dead don't have anyone to speak for them, Mr. Whitethorn, so something else does it now." She left me there with more questions than answers. That night, I set up cameras around the cemetery. Infrared, motion activated. I also set up my acoustic equipment. If it was making infrasound, I wanted to record it. I went back to the station and reviewed the footage the next morning. 3 cameras had stopped working at 2:47 a.m., just stopped. Batteries drained completely, even though they'd been fresh. The 4th camera caught something, a shadow. Huge. Moving between the trees. It was only visible for 3 seconds. But those 3 seconds made my hands shake so hard I almost dropped the tape. It walked on 2 legs. It was massive, and it had looked directly at the camera before everything went dark. Word got around that I was investigating the cemetery. That's when Billy Watson showed up. Billy was bad news. 32 years old, arrested twice for poaching, once for vandalism. He had a reputation for digging up old bottles from abandoned home sites and selling them to antique dealers. "Heard you're spending time at that old graveyard," he said, leaning against his truck outside the station. "Find anything valuable?" It's a cemetery, Billy. It's not a treasure hunt. Old graves sometimes have old things. Jewelry, coins. Nobody's using them anymore. You go near those graves and I'll have you arrested, I said. He grinned. It's public land, Ranger. I can go wherever I want. I knew that grin. He was going to rob those graves, whether I liked it or not. I called the sheriff's office, but they said unless I caught him in the act, there was nothing they could do. I thought about staking out the cemetery myself, but I had regular duties. I couldn't spend every night there. 2 days later, a hiker found Billy's body. He was lying 50 feet from the cemetery. His neck was broken, just like those deer. His truck was nearby, bed full of shovels and metal detectors. He'd been grave robbing, just like I thought. The sheriff came out, so did the coroner. They looked at Billy, they looked at the tracks around him, and they looked at me. What the hell did this? Sheriff Tom Pritchard asked. I don't know, I said. And I meant it. I had theories, but no answers. These tracks, he knelt down. What is this? Unknown large primate. Possibly. Don't say Bigfoot. I wasn't going to, but we were both thinking it. They took Billy's body away. The sheriff told me to stay away from the cemetery until they figured out what was going on. I nodded, but I knew I wasn't going to listen. That night, I went back. The forest was different now. The silence was heavier. The pressure in my chest was worse. I felt like I was being herded, pushed toward the cemetery, whether I wanted to go or not. I found the grave Billy had been digging. He'd gotten about 2 feet down before something stopped him, permanently. I heard a sound then, low, deep. It vibrated in my bones more than my ears. A rumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I turned around slowly. It was standing at the edge of the trees, 9 feet tall, maybe more. Covered in dark brown hair, arms that hung down past its knees. The face was almost human, broad nose, deep-set eyes that caught the moonlight and reflected it back. The shoulders were massive, muscles visible even through the hair. It wasn't moving, just watching me. My throat was dry. My legs wanted to run, but I forced myself to stay still. I thought about what Mary Rushing had said. Asterisk, long as you don't disturb the graves, it won't hurt you. Asterisk. I took a step back, away from the hole Billy had dug. The creature's eyes followed me. I took another step back, then another. It didn't move. I backed away slowly until I reached my truck. I got in, started the engine, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I could see it still standing there, watching until I was out of sight. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I went to see Dr. Patricia Hayes. She was an anthropologist at UT Martin, studying the displaced communities of land between the lakes. I'd met her at a conference 2 years ago. Marcus, you look terrible, she said when I walked into her office. I need to know about the relocations, specifically Rushing Creek. She pulled out a file box. Forced removal, 1963. 243 people displaced. Many of them didn't want to leave. There were protests, legal challenges. The government gave them 90 days to pack up entire lives. What happened to the ones who refused? Marshals came, physically removed them. There were stories of people chaining themselves to their porches, having to be cut loose and dragged away. Some families had been there since the 1,790 seconds. Imagine that, generations in one place, and then told you have 3 months to leave forever. Would that kind of trauma, could it create something? She looked at me carefully. You mean like a protective spirit? A guardian entity? I mean anything. I don't know what I mean anymore. There are stories, she said quietly. In Appalachian folklore, extreme emotional events can imprint on a place, leave something behind. Most cultures have versions of this, guardians, protectors, spirits that defend sacred ground. Do you believe it? I believe that grief and love are powerful forces. I believe that some things can't be explained by science alone, and I believe you've seen something that scared you, Marcus. What was it? I told her everything. When I finished, she sat back in her chair. Don't go back there. I have to. Why? Because it's my job, my forest, my responsibility. Your forest? She shook her head. Marcus, that forest belonged to the Rushing family long before it belonged to the Park Service. Maybe what you're seeing is just claiming what was always theirs. 3 days later, a development company announced plans to build a resort near Hillman Ferry. The survey crew was starting work in a week. Their plans included the area around the cemetery. I knew what was going to happen. I tried to stop it. I talked to my supervisor, to the park administrator, to anyone who would listen. I showed them the cemetery, explained about the cultural heritage, the protected status it should have. They promised to look into it. But in the meantime, the survey crew was coming. The first surveyor was Ross Mitchell, 38, worked for Hammond Development, had a wife and 2 kids. He disappeared on his second day in the field. They found his equipment near the cemetery. His truck was still running. His clipboard was on the ground, pen still attached. The survey stakes he'd been placing were bent in half. Ross himself was never found. That's when the media showed up. That's when the Park Service brought in outside experts. That's when everything became a circus. I couldn't let it continue. On a Thursday night in late August, I drove out to the cemetery alone. Storm clouds were rolling in, thunder rumbling in the distance. The air smelled like rain and earth. I stood at the gate and called out, "I know you're here. I know what you're protecting. We need to talk." The silence was absolute. Then I felt it, that infrasound pressure, building in my chest. The trees seemed to bend inward, like the forest was focusing on me. It stepped out of the shadows. Closer this time, maybe 20 feet away. I could see details now, the texture of the hair, the scars on its hands, the intelligence in its eyes. This wasn't an animal. This was something else. Something that understood more than I'd given it credit for. "They're going to keep coming," I said. "More surveyors, more construction crews. Eventually they'll bring bulldozers and dig up these graves whether I like it or not, unless I can give them a reason not to." It tilted its head, listening. "I can help you. I can get this place protected. Legal protection, not just, whatever this is. But you have to stop killing people. Even the bad ones. Even the ones who deserve it. Because every death brings more attention, and more attention means more people, and more people means they'll hunt you down." The creature made a sound, not the infrasound rumble, a vocalization complex, layered, almost like speech. It raised one huge hand and made a gesture, pointing to the graves. Then to itself, then to me. I understood. "You're bound to this place," I said. "You can't leave. You're protecting them because no one else will." It nodded. A clear, deliberate human nod. "What are you?" I whispered. It stepped closer. I wanted to run, but forced myself to stay still. It reached out one massive hand and touched my chest, gently, carefully. And I felt it. Grief. Overwhelming, crushing grief. Loss. Anger at being forgotten. Fear that the dead would be disturbed. Love for people long gone. Generations of memory bound up in this creature, protecting what couldn't protect itself. Tears ran down my face. I couldn't help it. "I understand," I said. "I'll make sure they're protected. I promise." It pulled its hand back, made another vocalization. This one sounded almost like approval. Then it turned and walked into the forest, not crashing. Not loud, just gone. Like it had never been there. The rain started as I drove away. It took 6 months, but I did it. I called in every favor I had. I contacted historical societies, cultural preservation groups, descendants of the relocated families. I documented every grave, every piece of evidence that the cemetery had been overlooked during the relocations. Dr. Hayes helped. So did Mary Rushing. So did descendants from 3 states who'd been trying for years to get recognition for their displaced families. In February 1976, the Rushing Creek Cemetery was designated as a protected cultural heritage site. No development within a mile. No disturbance of the grounds. The Park Service assigned regular maintenance. Descendants could visit any time. I volunteered to be the site manager. I still go there once a week. I check the graves, clear away weeds, make sure the stones are standing. Sometimes I bring flowers from Mary Rushing. She's too old to make the trip anymore, but she still asks about it. I haven't seen the creature since that night in the storm, but I know it's there. Sometimes I find things, deer bones arranged carefully near the graves, like offerings, trees marked at impossible heights, tracks after heavy rain. And sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in the station, I hear that low rumble, the infrasound, not threatening now, just dull present. A reminder. The development company gave up on the resort, said the area wasn't suitable. The The survey crew refused to go back after Ross disappeared. They found him 6 months later, 3 miles away, confused and disoriented with no memory of what happened. He quit his job and moved to Florida. Other rangers ask me sometimes if I believe in Bigfoot. I tell them I believe in protection. I believe some things are bigger than we understand. I believe that grief and love can take forms we're not ready to see. And I believe that in my forest, in these 170,000 acres between 2 lakes, there are guardians we didn't put there. Protectors who were here before us and will be here after we're gone. I'm okay with that. At night, when I'm locking up the station, I sometimes look toward the deep woods, toward Rushing Creek, and I think about that massive hand touching my chest, sharing grief that wasn't mine but became mine anyway. I think about the families forced to leave, the graves left behind, the thing that stayed to protect them. And I'm grateful, because some things are worth protecting, even by monsters, especially by monsters. My name is Marcus Whitethorn. I've been a ranger at Land Between the Lakes for 13 years now. I thought I knew everything about these woods. I was wrong, but I'm learning. My name is Catherine Ironwood, but everyone calls me Kate. I've been a wildlife ranger for 10 years now, working the high ridges along the Virginia-Tennessee border where Clinch Mountain cuts through the clouds. My job is simple: protect the livestock, manage the predators, and keep the peace between ranchers and nature. I'm good at what I do. I can track a mountain lion through fresh snow, tell you what a bear ate for breakfast by examining its scat, and estimate a deer population by counting browse lines on saplings. My grandmother was full Cherokee, and she taught me to read the forest the way most people read books. Every broken twig tells a story. Every disturbed stone has meaning. So when Bill Compton called me that frozen January morning in 1983, saying something was killing his cattle in ways he'd never seen before, I figured it was just another mountain lion. We'd had a harsh winter. Deep snow pushes the big cats down from the peaks, makes them bold and hungry. "Kate, you need to see this," Bill said over the crackling phone line. His voice was shaking. Bill had been ranching these mountains for 40 years. I'd never heard him sound scared before. I loaded my truck with my usual gear: tranquilizer rifle, tracking kit, camera, two-way radio. The roads up to Bill's property were barely passable, snow packed hard as concrete between the trees. It took me 2 hours to reach his ranch, my truck sliding sideways twice on the steep grades. Bill met me at his gate. He looked like he hadn't slept. "It's up on the north pasture," he said. "I only found it this morning. The calf was there last night at feeding time." We hiked up through knee-deep snow. The cold bit through my jacket, sharp and mean. The forest was too quiet. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, just the crunch of our boots and our breath hanging white in the air. Then I smelled it. Blood and something else, something wrong. The calf lay in a clearing, and I stopped cold. In 10 years, I'd seen dozens of predator kills. This wasn't like any of them. The animal had been opened cleanly, almost surgically. The meat was partially consumed, but not torn away like a cat or bear would do. It looked carved. Bite marks showed canine teeth, much larger than any mountain lion I'd tracked. But what froze me in place were the tracks around the body. I knelt down, brushing snow away from the clearest prints. Front paws, definitely feline, huge, bigger than any mountain lion print I'd ever seen. But the rear tracks, "What the hell?" I whispered. The back prints looked almost human. 5 distinct toe marks, but tipped with claws. And the gait was all wrong. The stride was too long, the rear prints placed like something walking upright. "I told you," Bill said quietly. "My grandfather used to tell stories. He said there was something up here that wasn't quite animal, wasn't quite human." I took photos from every angle, measured the tracks, collected samples of the bite marks using my casting kit. "It's just an unusually large mountain lion," I said, forcing confidence into my voice. "Maybe deformed feet from an old injury." But my hands were shaking as I packed my gear. Over the next week, I found 3 more kills, all cattle, all showing the same impossible tracks, the same too clean butchering. The pattern spread along the highest ridges, moving through old-growth forest, where Cherokee ceremonial sites dotted the landscape, stone circles and prayer rocks that predated white settlement by centuries. I spent my evenings in the ranger station, comparing my photos to every known predator in North America. Nothing matched. I called experts at Virginia Tech, sent them the casting molds of the tracks. They couldn't explain them either. The ranchers started talking. Old stories bubbled up from family histories. The Wampus Cat, they called it. A Cherokee legend about a medicine woman who was cursed for spying on sacred rituals, transformed into a creature that was half human, half mountain cat, doomed to walk the high places forever, protecting the old sites from those who would disturb them. I laughed it off. I had to. I was a scientist, trained in wildlife biology and predator behavior. Legends were just misidentifications, folk explanations for natural phenomena they didn't understand. But alone in my cabin at night, listening to the wind howl through the peaks, I wasn't laughing anymore. The sound woke me at 3 a.m. Not quite a scream, not quite a cat's yowl, something in between, something that sent ice water through my veins even before I was fully awake. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle and stepped onto my porch. The ranger cabin sits at 7,000 feet, perched on a ridge with nothing but forest in every direction. The nearest town is 20 miles of bad road away. My radio couldn't reach anyone from here. I was alone. The sound came again. Closer now. A wailing cry that rose and fell, mixing the hunting scream of a mountain lion with something that sounded horribly like human words in a language I didn't know. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, catching nothing but snow-heavy pines and dancing shadows. Then the smell hit me. Musk and copper and something else, something old and wrong that made my throat close up. I backed toward my door. My hands found the doorknob, and that's when I saw the tracks. They crossed my porch. Massive front paws, human-like rear feet. The wood was scratched deep where claws had dragged. The tracks led from the forest, across my porch, and stopped at my window, the window that looked into my bedroom. It had been watching me sleep. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat with my back to the wall, rifle across my knees, listening to the forest. Just before dawn, something heavy moved through the trees below the cabin. Branches cracked. Snow fell in soft thumps. Then silence. When morning light finally came, I followed the tracks. They led up the mountain toward the old Cherokee sites. I should have waited for backup, called another ranger, done anything except follow them alone. But I had to know. The tracks took me 3 miles up, into country I'd never properly explored. The forest grew older here. The trees, thick and gnarled, covered in moss that hung like torn curtains. Rock formations jutted through the snow, carved with symbols I recognized from Cherokee art spirals and animal forms and shapes that might have been letters in a language long forgotten. The tracks led to a rock face. A sheer cliff, 50 feet of vertical stone. They went straight up it. I stared, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. The claw marks scored the rock every 10 feet. No mountain lion could climb like that, nothing could. Jesus, I breathed. Not quite. I spun around, bringing my rifle up. An old man stood 20 feet away. He hadn't been there a second before. Cherokee, maybe 70 years old, wearing traditional clothing despite the freezing temperature. His eyes were dark and knowing. "Who are you?" I demanded. "Joseph Swimmer. My family has tended these mountains since before your people came." He looked at the claw marks on the cliff face. "You're tracking the Wampus Cat. It's just a large predator. An unknown species, maybe. But you don't believe that." He stepped closer. "You've seen the tracks. You've heard the cry. You know this is something else." I lowered my rifle slightly. "What is it really?" "My ancestor, a medicine woman named Ama Idohi. 300 years ago, she spied on a sacred ceremony forbidden to women. The shamans cursed her, transformed her into what you see now, half woman, half cat. Trapped between both forms, able to take neither fully. That's impossible." "Is it?" He gestured at the tracks. "You've been a ranger here for 10 years, Kate Ironwood. How many impossible things have you seen today?" My Cherokee name. I'd never told anyone my full name. My grandmother had given it to me in private, a secret between us. "Why is it killing cattle?" I asked. "Because men are coming to these mountains. Men who want to strip the earth, tear down the forests, destroy the sacred sites." He pointed up the mountain. "There's a survey team camping near the old ceremonial grounds. They work for a mining company. They've been digging test holes, setting up equipment." I hadn't heard about any mining survey. That's protected land. Not according to them. They have permits, lawyers, money. His face hardened. The Wampus cat doesn't care about permits. A scream split the air, high and terrified and human. It came from up the mountain, from the direction of the ceremonial grounds. I was running before I decided to move. The forest blurred past me, my lungs burned in the thin, cold air. Joseph Swimmer ran beside me, moving too fast for a man his age, his feet barely seeming to touch the snow. We burst into a clearing. 3 tents stood clustered near a circle of ancient stones. Survey equipment lay scattered in the snow, and in the center, surrounded by those impossible tracks, lay what was left of a man. His name had been Rick Patterson. I found his ID later, a surveyor working for Patriot Coal Company. He'd been torn apart with surgical precision, his chest opened, his blood melting the snow in a wide red circle. But what stopped my heart were the drag marks leading away from the body. Not paw prints, handprints, human hands with claws, pulling the body, arranging it deliberately in the center of the stone circle, like an offering on an altar. This wasn't an animal killing for food. This was a message. I called it in from the survey camp's radio. Sheriff's Department, state police, even the FBI, everyone wanted a piece of this now. But the storm hit before anyone could reach us. Within 2 hours, we were completely cut off. 3 feet of new snow closed the roads. Radio communication turned to static. We were trapped on the mountain with whatever was hunting us. 5 of us remained alive in the camp. Me, Joseph Swimmer, 2 surviving surveyors named Mike Edwards and Tom Chen, and a mining company security guard called Danny Morrison. Morrison kept a pistol on his hip and kept looking at the forest like he wanted to shoot something. "We should burn sage," Joseph said. "Perform a cleansing ceremony. We should get the hell off this mountain," Morrison snapped. "Hike out if we have to. In this storm?" I shook my head. "We'd freeze to death in an hour. We wait for rescue, barricade the largest tent, take shifts on watch, and..." The sound cut me off. That wailing cry, so close it seemed to come from all directions at once. The walls of the tent bowed inward, like something huge was pressing against them. Then silence. "It's playing with us," Tom whispered. His hands shook as he clutched a hunting knife. "It's a game to it. It's protecting the sacred sites," Joseph said quietly. "We're camped in the middle of a 300-year-old ceremonial ground. We've driven metal stakes into prayer stones. "I don't give a damn about your superstitions," Morrison interrupted. "We're dealing with a big cat, probably a jaguar or a..." The tent wall ripped open. A massive paw reached through, claws each the length of my thumb. But the paw twisted, changed, and suddenly it was a hand, a human hand, covered in tawny fur, with black claws where fingernails should be. The hand grabbed Morrison and yanked him through the tear. He screamed. Oh God, how he screamed. The sound cut off wet and sudden, replaced by tearing noises and the crack of breaking bones. We ran. No planning, no coordination, just blind animal panic. I grabbed my rifle, Tom grabbed a flashlight, Mike just ran. Joseph moved with purpose, leading us away from the camp, deeper into the forest. "This way," he shouted. "The old shelter cave, it's protected, sacred ground." We plunged through the storm, the world gone white and howling. Behind us, something roared, a sound too big for any natural cat, mixing triumph and rage, and something that almost sounded like words. The cave mouth appeared suddenly, a black gap in a wall of stone. We tumbled inside, gasping. Joseph lit a small fire using wood that had been carefully stacked inside. I noticed symbols painted on the walls in what looked like ancient pigments. "We'll be safe here," Joseph said. "This is a place of peace. The curse prevents her from entering." "Her?" Tom's voice cracked. "Ama Idohi, the Wampus cat. She was my ancestor, remember? She still thinks like a woman, even in that form. She understands sacred law." I moved to the cave entrance, peering out into the storm. Yellow eyes stared back at me from 15 feet away. The Wampus cat stood upright like a human, easily 6 feet tall. Its body was that of a massive mountain lion, tawny fur, rippling muscle, a long tail that lashed behind it, but it stood on legs that bent like human legs. Its front paws rested on its chest, and I could see the way they shifted between paw and hand, never quite settling on either form. The face was the worst. Cat features: the muzzle, the fangs, the ears, but the eyes were wrong. They held intelligence, understanding, something that looked back at me and knew what I was thinking. "Kate Ironwood," it said. The voice was rough, mixing growl and human speech. The words were Cherokee, but I understood them somehow, the meaning flowing directly into my mind. "You carry our blood. Why do you defend the destroyers?" "I'm not defending anyone," I said. "I'm trying to understand. Understand this." The creature pointed one claw-tipped finger at the ceremonial grounds below. "They come to tear open the earth, to poison the water, to cut the old trees and scatter the stones where your grandmothers prayed. I was cursed to prevent exactly this. By killing people? By protecting what remains." The yellow eyes narrowed. "3 of you are guilty. The man who drove the stakes into prayer stones, I took him. The man who planned to poison the creeks to extract coal, I will take him. The boy who laughed while breaking sacred markers, he will be last." My blood went cold. She meant Mike. The young surveyor huddling by the fire had vandalized the Cherokee sites. "How many have you killed?" I asked. 3 this winter, 7 last year, 12 the year before. The creature's ears flattened. "More come every season. I am one. They are legion. There has to be another way. Show me." The wampus cat sat back on her haunches, an eerily human gesture from a monster's body. "Show me how to stop them without blood. Your words? Your laws? They ignore both, but they fear death. Fear is the only language they understand." Behind me, Mike was crying softly. Tom gripped his knife so hard his knuckles were white. Joseph sat cross-legged, singing something low and rhythmic in Cherokee. "Give me time," I said. "Let me." The creature moved. 1 second she was 15 feet away, the next she was at the cave entrance, so fast my eyes couldn't track the movement. Her face pressed close to the invisible barrier that Joseph's sacred ground created. "Time," she hissed. "I have had 300 years, Kate Ironwood. I have watched the forests fall and the mountains bleed. I have seen every promise broken, every treaty torn apart. Time is the enemy of these mountains." She turned and melted into the storm, but her voice came back, carried on the wind. "When morning comes, leave this place. Take the old Cherokee road down the north slope. If I find you here after dawn, sacred ground will not save you. I will wait until hunger drives you out." The storm howled, the fire crackled, and we sat in the cave, knowing that something worse than winter waited outside. Dawn came gray and bitter. The storm had passed, leaving 4 feet of new snow that had transformed the forest into a white tomb. Mike hadn't spoken since the night before. Tom kept the hunting knife in his hand even when he slept. Joseph had been chanting prayers through the night, his voice growing hoarse. I'd been thinking about the wampus cat's words, about the mining permits and survey stakes and broken promises, about my grandmother's stories of the old times when Cherokee law governed these mountains. "Joseph," I said, "tell me about the curse. Exactly what were the terms?" He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Ama Idohi was cursed to guard the sacred sites until the Cherokee people no longer needed protection, until peace was restored between the people and the land. So there's a way to break it? In theory, a descendant of both the cursed and the cursers would have to perform a ceremony of reconciliation, bridge both worlds, acknowledge both histories." He paused. "But Kate, that's impossible. The shamans who cursed her are long dead. Their bloodlines are scattered. My grandmother was Cherokee. She was a swimmer, same clan as you." I pulled out my ranger ID, showing him my full name. Catherine Ironwood. But my grandmother's name was Idohi. Joseph went very still. "Idohi, that was Ama Idohi's clan name, yes. I'd figured it out during the long night. My grandmother always said our family had a responsibility to these mountains. I thought she just meant as rangers, but it was more than that, wasn't it? The cursers and the cursed, both in your blood." Joseph stood slowly. "It could work. If you performed the peace ceremony, acknowledged the wrong done to her and the necessity of the curse, offered a new path forward. She might be freed," I finished, "or at least bound to new terms." Tom laughed, high and broken. "You're talking about negotiating with a monster that's killed a dozen people. I'm talking about ending a 300-year war." I checked my rifle, though I knew bullets wouldn't help me now. "I need to find her." "She'll kill you," Mike whispered. "Maybe, but I have to try." Joseph gave me a small leather pouch, sacred tobacco, cornmeal, sage, the traditional offerings. If she agrees to listen, make a fire, burn these, speak the words of peace. He taught me the Cherokee phrases, made me repeat them until I had them memorized. Then I walked out into the snow. The forest was silent. Not even wind stirred the branches. I followed the tracks, always, those impossible mixed tracks back toward the ceremonial grounds. The survey camp was destroyed. The tents were shredded, equipment smashed, but no more bodies. She'd kept her word about giving us until morning. I found her at the stone circle. She sat in the center, in full daylight now, and I could see her clearly for the first time. The curse had caught her mid-transformation. One arm was fully feline, ending in paws with retractable claws. The other was human, covered in fur but with distinct fingers. Her legs were powerful and cat-like, but jointed wrong for four-legged movement. The tail was pure mountain lion, but the torso was almost human, and the face shifted as I watched. Sometimes more cat, sometimes more human, never quite settling. The yellow eyes tracked me with predator focus, but also with something else. Sadness, loneliness. 300 years of being trapped between forms, neither animal nor human, forever alone. You came, she said. The voice was clearer now, more human, foolish. Daughter of my daughter's daughters. I could end you. You could, I agreed, but you won't, because you're tired, Ama Idohi. 300 years is long enough. The creature's ears flattened. Do not presume to understand me, Ranger. I understand you were punished for seeking knowledge, for being curious about ceremonies you were forbidden to witness. I moved closer, keeping my hands visible and empty. The shamans were wrong. The curse was wrong. And what's happening to these mountains now, that's wrong too. Finally, wisdom. The wampus cat rose to her full height. So, you admit it, these men deserve death. Some of them, maybe. I thought of Rick Patterson's body, deliberately placed. But killing won't solve the problem. More will come. The mining companies have courts and lawyers and politicians. You can't kill them all. I can try. Or you can help me fight them properly. I knelt, started building a small fire using the sacred materials Joseph had given me. I'm a federal ranger. I have authority to close areas, deny permits, protect cultural sites, but I need proof that these grounds are still sacred, still actively used by the Cherokee people. The wampus cat watched me work. You offer me what? Papers? Laws? I offer you partnership. The fire caught, sage smoke rising. You know every sacred site in these mountains. You've protected them alone for 300 years. Help me document them. Show me which areas are most critical. I'll use legal channels to protect them. And if the legal channels fail, I met those yellow eyes directly. Then we find other ways. Together, you would side with me? Against your own people? You are my people. My grandmother's blood is your blood. I began the ceremony Joseph had taught me, speaking the old words of reconciliation. I acknowledge the wrong done to you. I acknowledge your sacrifice and your pain. I offer peace between the old ways and the new. The creature trembled. Her form flickered, shifting rapidly between cat and human. I cannot break the curse. Only one of the blood can free me, but the curse itself can be redirected, I said. Not broken. Changed. You were cursed to protect the sacred places until peace was restored. I'm offering you a new kind of protection. Not through death, but through law and presence. Let me be your hands in the human world. You be my eyes in the wild one. For a long moment, nothing happened. The smoke rose, the fire crackled, and the wampus cat stared at me with eyes that held 3 centuries of pain and rage and loneliness. Then she spoke in Cherokee, words that I felt more than heard, words that seemed to echo from the mountains themselves. She accepted the peace offering. Not freedom from the curse, she was too bound by ancient magic for that, but a new purpose within it. The ceremony took an hour. When it ended, Ama Idohi still wore her cursed form. But something had changed in her eyes. The madness was gone, replaced by clarity and purpose. I will show you the sacred places, she said. And I will watch. If your laws fail, if the destroyers come despite your protections, I will do what must be done. Fair enough. I stood, my legs stiff from kneeling. But you have to stop killing people, unless there's no other choice. Agreed. The wampus cat's lips pulled back in what might have been a smile, though I reserve the right to frighten them very badly. It took 3 days for rescue teams to reach us. By then, the story was set. A large predator, probably a jaguar or mountain lion of unusual size, had attacked the survey camp during the storm. The mining company decided the area was too dangerous and too expensive to develop. They withdrew their permits. I filed my report with careful accuracy. Unknown predator. Ongoing investigation. Area closed to development pending wildlife study. The FBI looked at me funny, but they didn't have evidence to contradict my story. The survivors Tom, Mike, and I all gave matching statements. Joseph Swimmer became my official Cherokee cultural consultant. Over the following months, he and I documented every sacred site in the Clinch Mountain Range. The paperwork took forever, but eventually we got federal protection for nearly 80,000 acres. The killings stopped. Mostly. A poacher named Danny Morrison was found dead the following autumn. He'd been hunting illegally near the old prayer sites. The cause of death was listed as animal attack, but I saw the body. I recognized the surgical precision of the wounds. A developer scout who tried to survey the protected areas for a ski resort vanished the next winter. They found his remains in the spring, arranged carefully in a stone circle. The message was clear. I still work these mountains. I'm the senior ranger now, responsible for the entire Clinch Mountain Wildlife Management Area. My office is filled with maps marking the sacred sites, the protected zones, the boundaries that must not be crossed. Sometimes, on my rounds, I find gifts. A perfectly preserved eagle feather left on my truck hood, a circle of white stones arranged outside my cabin. Once, a deer carcass butchered with surgical precision, enough meat to last me a month, left where only I would find it. I never see her. Not directly, but I feel her presence. The wampus cat still walks these ridges, still guards the old places. She's just more selective about how she protects them now. Last month, a mining company executive called my office. He wanted to discuss reconsidering the protected status of certain areas. I told him I'd need to conduct a thorough wildlife survey first. While we were talking, I heard scratching on my office window, slow, deliberate, the sound of very large claws on glass. The executive heard it too. His voice went high and thin. "What was that?" "Just a branch," I said. "We get a lot of wind up here." "Right. Wind." He cleared his throat. "You know what, Ranger? On second thought, I think we'll focus our development on other regions. Clinch Mountain can stay wild." "I think that's a wise decision," I said. After we hung up, I looked at the window. 4 long scratches marked the glass, and in the forest beyond, just for a moment, I saw yellow eyes watching me from the shadows. Then they were gone. My grandmother used to say that some places belong to the old ways, and were just visitors passing through. She was right. These mountains have a guardian, one who's walked between worlds for 300 years. She's lonely, she's fierce, and she's mine to work with. The Cherokee called her Wampus Cat. I call her partner. And God help anyone who forgets that these mountains are protected. My name is Samuel Bridgewater, and I've been a forest ranger for 15 years. People call me Sam. I patrol the deep parts of Ouachita National Forest in Arkansas, where the trees grow so thick you can't see the sky. Most folks never go where I work. It's just me, the animals, and miles of green wilderness. I thought I'd seen everything these woods could throw at me. Bears, wild hogs, lost hikers, drug runners. I was wrong. July 1971 was the hottest summer on record. The heat stuck to you like wet clothes, and the air was so thick you could almost chew it. The drought had been going on for weeks. Even the Caddo River was running low, showing muddy banks that hadn't seen daylight in years. I was checking my usual route near Caddo Gap when the radio crackled to life. "Sam, you copy?" It was Sheriff Carl Phillips from the county seat. "I'm here, Carl. What's up?" "Got some strange reports coming in from the Fook area. Folks saying something's been bothering their homes at night. Probably just teenagers raising hell, but the families are pretty spooked." I knew the Fook area. It's where the forest meets the swamp, 45 miles from the nearest real town. The families out there live in old farmhouses, surrounded by nothing but trees and water. They're tough people who don't scare easy. "What kind of bothering?" I asked. "Torn screens, damaged porches. One family said something tried to get in their house, found footprints they say don't look right. I sighed. It was probably kids, or maybe a bear getting into garbage. But I had to check it out. I'll head over there today, I told him. The drive to the first house took me deep into the bottoms, where the road turned to gravel, then dirt. Spanish moss hung from cypress trees like old curtains. The air smelled of mud and rotting plants. It was quiet except for my truck engine and the buzz of mosquitoes. The Ford place sat on a small rise above the swamp. Bobby Ford met me on his porch before I even got out of the truck. He was a thin man in his 40s with worried eyes. "Thank God you came," he said. "My wife's been afraid to sleep." I looked at his front porch. The screen door was ripped clean off its hinges. The wooden railing had deep scratch marks, like something with claws had grabbed it. "Tell me what happened," I said, pulling out my notebook. 3 nights ago, around midnight, we heard something on the porch. Heavy footsteps, like a big man walking around. Then it started scratching at the door. "Did you see anything?" Bobby shook his head. "Too dark." But when morning came, we found this. He led me around to the side of the house. In the soft mud near the foundation was a footprint. I knelt down and measured it with my ruler. 17 inches long, 5 toes, but spread wide like a hand. The heel was deep and round, almost human-like. I'd never seen anything like it. "Could be a hoax," I said. But even as I spoke, I didn't believe it. The print was too perfect, pressed deep into the mud. The weight that made this track had to be enormous. "You think I'd tear up my own house to fool people?" Bobby asked. He sounded hurt. "No, I don't." I stood up and brushed the dirt off my knees. "Any other families report similar things?" "The Crawfords, about 2 miles south, and old Mrs. Jenkins up the road." I spent the rest of the day visiting the other houses. Each family told the same story. Something big walking around their homes at night. Damaged property, strange footprints. At the Crawford place, I found something that made my blood run cold. Jim Crawford wasn't home, but his wife Sarah showed me where they'd found their dog. The animal was dead, lying beside their chicken coop. It was a big German shepherd, probably 80 pounds. Whatever killed it had twisted its neck completely around. "Rex was a good guard dog," Sarah said, her voice shaky. "He wasn't afraid of anything." I examined the dog's body. No claw marks or bite wounds. Just that impossible twisted neck, like someone had grabbed its head and spun it like a bottle cap. As the sun started going down, I made camp near the Crawford place. I told Sarah I'd keep watch, make sure nothing bothered them during the night. I sat in my truck with the windows down, listening to the swamp sounds, frogs croaking, night birds calling, the splash of a gator in the distance. Normal sounds. Then, around 11 o'clock, everything went quiet. The silence was so complete, it made my ears ring. Even the insects stopped buzzing. I'd been in these woods long enough to know that when nature goes quiet, there's a reason. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the truck. The beam cut through the darkness, showing nothing but trees and Spanish moss, but I could feel something watching me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. That's when I smelled it. It was like a wet dog, but stronger. Mixed with something else, something wild and musky that made my stomach turn. The smell was so thick, I could taste it. I clicked on my radio. "Carl, you there?" Static. "Carl, this is Sam. Please respond." More static. My radio had never failed before. I was about to get back in the truck when I heard it. A sound like wood creaking, coming from the Crawford house. I pointed my flashlight toward the porch and saw the front steps sagging under an enormous weight. But there was nothing there. The steps groaned again, and I saw the wooden boards bend down as if something invisible was walking up them. The porch shook. Then the front door rattled in its frame. I ran toward the house, shouting, "Hey, get away from there." The door stopped rattling. The smell got stronger, making my eyes water. Then I heard heavy footsteps running away into the swamp. But I never saw what made them. I banged on the Crawford's door. "Sarah, are you all right?" Her voice came from inside, scared and small. "Sam? What's happening?" "Stay inside and lock the door. Don't come out until morning." I spent the rest of the night walking around the house with my flashlight, but whatever had been there was gone. When dawn came, I found new footprints in the mud around the porch. The same impossible 17-inch tracks. As I drove back to town that morning, I knew 3 things for certain. Something was stalking the families in the bottoms. Something big enough to kill a German shepherd with its bare hands. and something smart enough to test human defenses without showing itself. I just didn't know what yet. I spent the next 2 days researching everything I could find about the area. At the county library, I dug through old newspaper files and local history books. What I found didn't make me feel any better. The stories went back over 100 years. Settlers in the 1800s wrote about a wild man living in the swamps. They said it was 8 feet tall and covered in hair, with glowing red eyes. Most people figured it was just tall tales, but the reports kept coming. The Cherokee who used to live here called it the Hairy Man. Their stories said it was a guardian spirit that protected the deep swamp from outsiders. Local folks had different names for it over the years. The Boggy Creek Monster, the Southern Sasquatch. But everyone agreed on one thing: it was big, it was strong, and it didn't like people getting too close to its home. On my 3rd day back in the area, I got a call that changed everything. "Sam," Sheriff Phillips said over the radio. His voice was tight. "You need to get to the Crawford place right now." "What's wrong?" "Just get over there. And bring your camera." I drove faster than I should have on those winding dirt roads. When I pulled up to the Crawford house, I saw 2 other vehicles, the sheriff's car and an ambulance. That's when I knew somebody was hurt. Or worse. Carl Phillips met me at the gate. He looked pale and sick. "It's Jim Crawford," he said. "Sarah found him this morning." "Found him where?" Carl pointed toward the tree line behind the house. "In the woods, about 50 yards from the house. He's dead, Sam." My stomach dropped. "What happened?" "That's what we need to figure out." He led me through the trees to a small clearing where the paramedics were loading a covered body onto a stretcher. I'd seen death before in my years as a ranger, but something about this felt different. "Wrong. Show him," Carl told one of the paramedics. The man pulled back the sheet, and I had to turn away. Jim Crawford's body was broken. His chest was caved in like he'd been hit by a truck. His arms were twisted at impossible angles. But the worst part was his face, frozen in a scream of pure terror. "Any idea what could do this?" Carl asked. I knelt down and looked at the ground around the body. The earth was torn up, like there had been a fight. I found more of those giant footprints, but these were different. Deeper, pressed into the dirt with incredible force. "Whatever did this was angry," I said. "Sarah says Jim went out around midnight to check on a noise in the chicken coop," Carl explained. "When he didn't come back, she figured he'd fallen asleep in his chair. Found him out here this morning." I stood up and looked around the clearing. Something caught my eye about 20 feet away, marks on a big oak tree. I walked over and examined them. 4 parallel grooves cut deep into the bark, 8 feet off the ground. Claw marks. But no bear or wildcat had claws that could cut that deep into oak. "Carl," I called, "come look at this." He whistled low when he saw the marks. "What do you think made these?" "I don't know. But whatever it was could reach 8 feet high and had claws like knives." We spent the rest of the day searching the area. We found a trail of broken branches leading into the swamp, but it disappeared at the water's edge. The only other clue was that awful smell, that same musky, wild odor I'd smelled before, but stronger now. It hung in the air like a cloud. That evening, I sat with Sarah Crawford in her kitchen while she drank coffee with shaking hands. "I keep thinking I should have gone with him," she said. "If I'd been there, you'd be dead too," I told her gently. "Jim was trying to protect you. That's what husbands do." She nodded, tears running down her cheeks. "What killed him, Sam?" "The sheriff says it might have been a bear, but I've never seen a bear do that." I didn't know what to tell her. I'd seen bear attacks before. This wasn't one. "I'm going to find out," I promised. "And I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." After I left the Crawford place, I drove to Bobby Ford's house. I found him on his porch with a shotgun across his knees. "Heard about Jim," he said when I got out of my truck. "That thing's still out there, isn't it?" "Maybe. I want you to pack up your family and stay in town for a few days." Bobby shook his head. "This is my land, Sam. My daddy's buried here, and his daddy before him. I'm not running from some wild animal. This isn't just a wild animal, Bobby." Jim Crawford was a strong man, and something tore him apart like he was made of paper. "Then I'll be ready for it." He patted the shotgun. "Double-aught buckshot will stop anything that walks on 4 legs. What if it doesn't walk on 4 legs? Bobby gave me a strange look, but I didn't explain. I couldn't explain something I didn't understand myself. That night, I made camp in the woods between the Ford place and old Mrs. Jenkins' house. I figured if this thing was working its way through the area, one of them would be next. I set up motion sensors around my campsite and kept my rifle loaded. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound made me jump. Around 2 in the morning, one of my sensors went off. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight and headed toward the Jenkins place. Mrs. Jenkins was in her 80s and lived alone in a house her grandfather built. If something was after her, she wouldn't stand a chance. I was halfway to her house when I heard her screaming. I ran through the trees, branches tearing at my clothes. The screaming stopped suddenly, and that scared me more than the noise had. When I reached the clearing around her house, I could see lights on inside. The front door was hanging open, swaying in the breeze. "Mrs. Jenkins," I called. "Are you all right?" No answer. I approached the house slowly, rifle ready. The porch steps were covered in mud and leaves, like something had tracked dirt from the swamp. The smell was there again, so strong it made my eyes water. I stepped through the front door and found Mrs. Jenkins in her living room. She was sitting in her rocking chair, staring at the far wall, alive, but not responding when I called her name. "Mrs. Jenkins? It's Sam Bridgewater. Are you hurt?" She turned to look at me slowly, like she was waking up from a dream. Her eyes were wide with shock. "It looked at me," she whispered. "Right through the window. Its eyes were red like hot coals." "What looked at you?" "The hairy man, just like my grandmother used to tell stories about. But bigger. So much bigger." I helped her to the kitchen and made her some tea. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the cup. "Tell me exactly what happened," I said. "I was in bed when I heard something on the porch. Heavy footsteps, like a man wearing big boots. Then it started scratching at the walls, like it was looking for a way in." "What did you do?" I got up and looked out the window. She took a sip of tea. "That's when I saw it, standing right there in my yard, looking back at me." "Can you describe it?" "Tall as a tree, covered in dark hair. Its face was like a man's but wild, primitive, and those eyes," she shuddered. "It tilted its head at me, like it was curious, like it was studying me." "How long did it watch you?" "Felt like hours, but probably just a few minutes. Then it turned and walked away into the swamp." "But Sam, it walked on 2 legs. Like a man." I stayed with Mrs. Jenkins until dawn, then helped her pack a bag. I drove her to town myself and made sure she had a place to stay with her daughter. On the drive back to the forest, I tried to make sense of what I was dealing with. The footprints, the incredible strength, the intelligence it showed in testing the houses. Everything pointed to something that shouldn't exist. But Jim Crawford was dead. That was real enough. And whatever killed him was still out there in the swamp, getting bolder. Word spread fast in a small community like ours. By the end of the week, everyone knew about Jim Crawford's death and the strange things happening in the bottoms. Most people stayed away from the area, but that just made my job harder. I couldn't protect people who insisted on staying, and I couldn't catch something I couldn't understand. Sheriff Phillips brought in a tracker from Little Rock, a man named Roy Benson who had a reputation for finding things others couldn't. Roy was a small, wiry guy with sharp eyes and 20 years of experience hunting everything from lost children to escaped convicts. "Show me these tracks," he said when we met at the Ford place. I led him to the clearest prints I'd found. Roy knelt down and studied them for a long time, measuring and taking photos. "These are real," he said finally. "Whatever made them weighs at least 500 pounds, maybe more. The depth and spacing suggest it's bipedal, walks on 2 legs most of the time." "Any idea what it could be?" Roy shook his head. "I've tracked bear, big cats, wild hogs, even circus animals that got loose. Never seen anything like this. The stride length suggests it's 8 feet tall, maybe taller. Think you can follow its trail?" "I can try, but if this thing is as dangerous as you say, I want backup." We spent the next day following the tracks deeper into the swamp. Roy was good at his job. He could spot signs I would have missed. Bent reeds, disturbed mud, even scratches on trees where the creature had passed. The trail led us to a part of the swamp I'd never explored, where the water was dark as coffee and cypress trees grew so thick they blocked out the sun. The air was thick with moisture and the smell of decay. "This is its territory," Roy said quietly. "Look around, no other animal signs. Even the gators avoid this area." He was right. The silence was unnatural. No birds, no insects, No splash of fish jumping, just the sound of water lapping against the trees and our own breathing. We found what might have been its den, a hollow under the roots of a massive cypress where the ground was packed down and covered with bones. Most were from animals, but some looked disturbingly human. "We should get out of here," I said. Roy was taking pictures of the bone pile when we heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The hair on my arms stood up. "Move," I whispered. We backed away from the den slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. The growling got louder, and I caught a glimpse of something moving through the trees about 50 yards away. Something big and dark that moved between the trunks like a shadow. We made it back to solid ground without seeing the creature clearly, but I could feel it watching us the whole time, following us, making sure we left its territory. "That thing was playing with us," Roy said when we reached our vehicles. "It could have attacked any time, but it chose not to. Why? Maybe it's not ready to fight yet, or maybe it's learning about us, just like we're learning about it." That thought didn't make me feel any better. 2 days later, Roy went back into the swamp alone. He said he'd found a new trail and wanted to follow it while it was fresh. I told him to wait for backup, but he was confident he could handle himself. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. When Roy didn't check in by radio that evening, I organized a search party. We found his truck parked at the edge of the swamp with his gear still inside. His trail was easy to follow at first. He'd left markers tied to branches to find his way back. The markers led us deep into the swamp, to a small island covered with cattails. That's where the trail ended. We found Roy buried under 2 feet of mud and vegetation, like something had tried to hide the body. The local doctor said he'd been dead for hours, but he couldn't determine the cause of death. No obvious wounds, no broken bones. Just a look of absolute terror frozen on his face. "Heart attack, maybe," the doctor suggested. "Extreme fear can stop a man's heart." I didn't argue, but I'd seen Roy face down armed fugitives without breaking a sweat. It would take more than fear to kill a man like that. After we recovered Roy's body, I made a decision. I couldn't keep putting other people at risk. This was my forest, my responsibility. If there was something dangerous in the swamp, I had to deal with it myself. I went to see Colonel James Mitchell at the Army Corps of Engineers office. Mitchell was a straight-talking military man who handled government business in the area. If anyone could help me, it was him. "You're talking about a wild animal, Bridgewater," he said when I told him the story. "Call in a hunting party and put it down. It's not just a wild animal, Colonel. This thing shows intelligence. It plans its attacks, studies its targets, and it's killed 2 men in less than a week." Mitchell leaned back in his chair. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "I need backup, military backup. Men with experience handling dangerous situations. I can't deploy soldiers to hunt a bear, Sam. Then call it a training exercise. Your men need practice with wilderness operations, right? Consider this a live-fire drill in a hostile environment." Mitchell studied me for a long moment. "You really believe this thing is that dangerous?" "I believe it's going to keep killing until someone stops it." "All right, I'll see what I can do. But if this turns out to be some kind of wild goose chase, your career in the Forest Service is over." "Understood." I spent that night with Bobby Ford and his family, trying to convince them one more time to leave the area temporarily. "We've been here for 3 generations, Bobby said. "My great-grandfather cleared this land with his own hands. I'm not abandoning it because of some overgrown ape." His wife, Mary, was less stubborn. "Maybe we should listen to Sam, Bobby, just until they catch this thing." "There's nothing to catch," Bobby insisted. "It's just a bear with a hormone problem. A few good shots will bring it down." I was still arguing with him when we heard the first sounds outside, heavy footsteps on the porch, just like before, but this time they were accompanied by something new. A low, rhythmic banging. We looked out the front window and saw the porch railing shaking. Something was hitting it with tremendous force, testing how strong it was. "Get your family to the back room," I told Bobby. "Now." The banging stopped suddenly. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then we heard the creature moving around the house, testing windows, rattling doors. It was systematically checking every possible way inside. Mary Ford gathered her 2 young children and hurried them to the bedroom. Bobby grabbed his shotgun and moved to the front window. "I can see it," he whispered. I joined him at the window. In the pale moonlight, I got my first clear look at the thing that had been terrorizing the area. It was massive, at least 8 feet tall and broad as a tree trunk. Dark hair covered its body, and its face was a mix of human and animal features. Intelligent eyes, but wild and primitive. When it turned its head toward the window, I saw those red eyes Mrs. Jenkins had described. It looked directly at us, tilted its head slightly, then picked up a piece of firewood from the porch. With casual ease, it threw the log through the front window. Glass exploded across the living room. The creature stepped through the broken window frame like it was walking through a doorway. Bobby fired his shotgun point blank into the creature's chest. The blast knocked it backward a step, but it didn't fall, didn't even seem hurt. It just looked down at the small tears in its hair, where the buckshot had hit, then looked back at Bobby, and smiled. That's when I knew we were dealing with something beyond normal understanding. This wasn't just a large animal. This was something that could think, plan, and apparently survive a shotgun blast to the chest. I grabbed my radio and called for help, but got only static in return. The creature had somehow disrupted our communications, just like it had the first night. The thing stepped farther into the room, and I noticed it was carrying something, a long, straight branch it had broken from a tree. It held the branch like a club, testing its weight and balance. Tool use, planning, intelligence. This was no ordinary animal. The creature stood in the middle of Bobby Ford's living room, holding that makeshift club and studying us with those terrible red eyes. In the close confines of the house, it looked even bigger. Its head nearly touched the ceiling, and its shoulders were broader than the doorway. "Everybody stay calm," I said quietly, though my own heart was hammering against my ribs. Bobby was fumbling to reload his shotgun, his hands shaking. The creature watched him with what looked like curiosity, head tilted to one side like a dog watching a trick. From the back room, I could hear Mary Ford whispering prayers and trying to keep her children quiet. The creature took a step toward Bobby, and I made a decision. I stepped between them. "That's far enough," I said, raising my rifle. The thing looked at me and made a sound. Not quite a growl, but something like communication. It was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand what. Then it did something that changed everything. It pointed at Bobby with one massive finger, then made a gesture toward the back room where his family was hiding. The meaning was clear. Asterisk. Give me the man, and I'll leave the others alone. Asterisk. This wasn't random violence. It had a purpose, a plan. But why Bobby? What had he done to earn this thing's attention? "I'm not giving you anyone," I told it. The creature studied me for a long moment, then nodded slightly. It understood what I'd said. It was intelligent enough to communicate, even if we couldn't speak the same language. That's when Bobby finished reloading his shotgun. He stepped around me and fired again, this time aiming for the creature's head. The shot went wide, blasting a hole in the wall behind the creature. But the sound and flash enraged it. The thing let out a roar that shook the windows and swung its club at Bobby. I tackled Bobby, knocking him out of the way just as the club smashed through the space where his head had been. The wood splintered against the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. The creature turned its attention to me. I rolled away and came up with my rifle, but the thing was faster than anything that size should have been. It grabbed the rifle barrel and twisted the weapon out of my hands like taking a toy from a child. I was weaponless, facing something that could crush me without effort. But instead of attacking, the creature tossed my rifle aside and looked toward the back room again. It wanted something specific, and it wasn't going to be distracted. That's when I realized what was happening. This wasn't a random attack. The creature had been watching the Ford family for weeks, learning their routines, their vulnerabilities. It had a specific goal. "Bobby," I called. "What aren't you telling me? Why is this thing after you?" "I don't know what you mean." The creature moved toward the back room, and I heard Mary Ford scream. I grabbed a poker from the fireplace and followed it. The thing had stopped at the bedroom door and was sniffing the air. Its nostrils flared, and it made that communication sound again, urgent now, almost frantic. "Bobby," I shouted, "what did you do?" "Nothing. I didn't do anything." But his voice had changed. Guilty. Scared. The creature raised its club to smash through the bedroom door, and that's when Bobby finally told the truth. "I found its baby," he said quietly. Everything stopped. Even the creature seemed to freeze. "What baby?" I demanded. 3 weeks ago, I was hunting near the deep swamp, Found a young one caught in a trap some poacher had set. It was already dead when I got there. The creature turned away from the door to stare at Bobby. The intelligence in its eyes was unmistakable now, along with something else. Grief. Rage. The need for justice. "Where is it now?" I asked. "I sold it to a man in Little Rock. He said he was a scientist, wanted to study it. Paid me $500. The creature let out another roar, but this one was different. It was the sound of a parent mourning its child. The sound of grief turned to fury. I understood now. This wasn't a monster terrorizing innocent people. This was a father trying to find his dead child and taking revenge on the man who had profited from its death. The creature raised its club again, but this time I stepped between it and Bobby. "Wait," I said, holding up my hands. "I understand. But killing him won't bring your baby back." The creature stared at me, and I saw something incredible in its eyes. It was thinking, considering my words. "Bobby," I said without turning around, "call that man in Little Rock. Tell him to bring back what he bought from you. He won't do that. He probably already. Call him." The creature waited while Bobby made the phone call. I could hear both sides of the conversation. The scientist, if that's what he really was, had already sold the body to a private collector. It was gone, probably stuffed and mounted in someone's trophy room. When Bobby hung up, the creature looked at me questioningly. I had to tell it the truth. "I'm sorry," I said. "Your child is gone, but this man didn't kill it. He found it already dead." The creature stared at Bobby for a long moment, then back at me. It was trying to decide what justice looked like. That's when I heard vehicles outside. Military vehicles. Colonel Mitchell had come through with his promise of backup. The creature heard them too. It moved to the broken front window and looked out at the soldiers setting up a perimeter around the house. When it turned back to us, I saw something new in its expression. Resignation. It knew it was trapped. "You don't have to fight them," I told it. "There's another way out." I pointed toward the back of the house, where the swamp came almost to the back door. "Your territory. They can't follow you there." The creature nodded once, then did something that will stay with me forever. It reached into a pouch made from woven reeds that I hadn't noticed before, and pulled out something small and white. A bone, part of a tiny skull. Its child. It had carried part of its baby with it all this time. The creature placed the bone on Bobby's kitchen table gently, almost reverently. Then it looked at me one last time and headed for the back door. "Wait," I called. It stopped and turned. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said. The creature tilted its head, and for just a moment, I saw something almost human in its expression. Acknowledgement, understanding, maybe even forgiveness. Then it was gone, disappearing into the swamp as silently as smoke. The soldiers found the house empty except for us. They searched the swamp for 3 days but found nothing. No tracks, no traces, no sign that anything unusual had ever lived there. 3 months later, I was sitting in a psychiatrist's office in Little Rock, trying to explain why I couldn't sleep. The nightmares weren't about the creature. They were about the look in its eyes when it placed that tiny bone on the table. Dr. Sarah Chen was a kind woman who specialized in treating law enforcement officers with PTSD. She listened without judgment as I told her about the case that ended my career. "The official report says you suffered a nervous breakdown brought on by stress and isolation," she said. "But that's not what really happened. Is it? The official report says a lot of things that aren't true. After the military training exercise in the swamp, things moved quickly. The Ford family was relocated under a government assistance program. Mrs. Jenkins was moved to a nursing home in town. The entire area was declared a restricted military zone for environmental testing. Nobody talks about what really happened out there. Jim Crawford's death was attributed to a bear attack. Roy Benson died of natural causes. The reports were filed, the area was closed, and everyone involved was encouraged to find new careers. I took early retirement with full benefits and a disability rating for PTSD. The Forest Service was very generous, as long as I signed papers agreeing never to discuss the Caddo Gap incident. "Do you regret how it ended?" Dr. Chen asked. I thought about that question for a long time. I regret that a father lost his child. I regret that people died. But I don't regret treating that creature like a thinking being instead of just a monster. "Do you think it's still out there?" "I know it is. Sometimes, when the wind is right, people in the area report a strange smell coming from the swamp. And there are still stories. Hunters finding impossible footprints, campers hearing sounds that don't match any known animal. Doesn't that worry you? Not anymore. It got what it wanted. Its territory protected, its child's memory honored. I think it just wants to be left alone now. Doctor, Chen made some notes in my file. You've made remarkable progress, Sam. The nightmares are less frequent, and you're sleeping better. How do you feel about possibly returning to work? I've been thinking about teaching. Maybe wildlife biology at the community college. Help people understand that there's more in the woods than we think, and most of it deserves our respect, not our fear. After my appointment, I drove back to Arkansas. I have a small cabin now, 50 miles from Caddo Gap, but still close enough to keep an eye on things. Local folks know I used to be a ranger, and sometimes they ask me about strange things they've seen in the woods. I listen to their stories and give them advice. Respect the forest, don't take more than you need, and remember that you're a guest in something else's home. Most people think I'm just a burned-out ex-ranger with too much imagination. But every now and then, someone comes to me with a story that sounds familiar. Impossible footprints. A smell like wet fur and wilderness. The feeling of being watched by something ancient and intelligent. When that happens, I tell them the same thing I told Dr. Chen. Leave it alone, and it will leave you alone. The creature and I have an understanding now. It protects its territory, and I make sure people know to respect it. It's not a perfect solution, but it's kept the peace for over a year. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind carries that wild smell from the direction of the swamp, I think about the bone it left on Bobby Ford's table. A father's love, carrying the memory of his child through the darkest places on earth. That's not a monster's behavior. That's something much more complicated and much more human than most people would ever want to believe. But I know better now. I know that the line between civilized and wild, between human and animal, between monster and father, is thinner than we like to think. And sometimes, in the deep places where the light doesn't reach, that line disappears entirely. The Fook monster is still out there in Caddo Gap, but it's not the monster the stories make it out to be. It's just a father who lost everything and found a way to keep going. I can respect that, even if it means I'll never sleep quite the same again.